Kimbo, not that I'm zombie and mama and dombe. All Kimbo belongs to our creators. We do honor our elevated Bakulu of the light, our ancestors, and we are honored to be here again on this Sunday. We normally do it on a Saturday, but we're here Sunday. And I want to thank everyone that is here on Zoom for being with us and truly thank our guest. We are honored to have her to be with us. And without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over at this moment to our Queen Mama. I call her our Queen Mama sister, Queen Mama Diana McKinney, to introduce our distinguished guests.
Oh,
Queen.
CMA, Mbote family, Mbote, and Kembo, be to our creators, Tata Zami and Mama Dombe. And we honor and acknowledge our elevated Bakulus of the light, our healers, warriors, and mercenaries of the light. We are certainly glad today to be here, and we are grateful to have Dr. Kimberly Wren, whom I met through Amenemope, who is the librarian at the Botanical Research Institute of Texas, where I was doing some research on traditional African and Native American medicine. So Miss Nino decided that I should meet this Dr. Wren, and she told me what she thought about Dr. Wren. And absolutely, the very first time I met her, I was in just overwhelmed and excited and inspired. And so I would like to introduce her to the family. Dr. Wren is currently working at the Collin College and the University of North Texas. She is an adjunct professor in the Department of Anthropology at the UNT. Her research interests include political and human rights, anthropology, North American and Mesoamerican bioarchaeology, African and European diaspora African and European diaspora archaeology, dental anthropology, forensic anthropology, and her teaching focuses on systemic discrimination, racialization, health disparities, social movements, and alternative narratives in marginalized communities locally and globally. She's engaged with students on research projects as an advisor and as a mentor in the McNair Scholars Program. She's also currently working on research related to racialization and human rights that highlights alternative minority experiences in an effort to create a more democratic history, one that more accurately depicts diverse class and race affiliations. Now, I know also that she has been involved with the Belize anthropology project in Belize, and that she is an expert also in Mayan history. So I would like to turn this over to Mama Brenda, who will now introduce and give Dr. Wren the mic.
Well, I don't think I need to do an introduction. You did an excellent job of introducing Dr. Wren here. Greetings, Dr. Wren. We are so excited and honored to be in your presence and to glean from the knowledge, the wealth of knowledge that you have. So on behalf of that, we're going to just open up and allow you to start your presentation in the way that you feel comfortable and see fit. And thank you again for your time. We greatly appreciate that.
Good morning. It's still morning here, so because I'm in Texas. So good morning, good afternoon. So I do want to make a correction. The McNair Scholars Program, I don't think that program exists anymore as of, I want to say a year or two ago. They still have the Honors College, but it's kind of gotten wonky with all the laws that attempt to get rid of diversity and inclusion. So, yeah. So anyway, that program is, yeah, it exists, but at UNT, that's not really a thing anymore. I'm adjunct at UNT, but I'm full-time at Collin College. So, I teach, there are 4 fields of anthropology. I teach cultural anthropology, biological or physical anthropology, archaeology, and a general class that covers also includes linguistics. That's what I teach at Collin College. At UNT, I'm allowed to teach more upper division classes because it's a university and not a community college. So I teach human rights anthropology, African American anthropology, and also teach indigenous courses there. And that's where I'm able to be on committees and do student research. But today, what I want to talk about is a little bit about my path. So I am a minister. I'm not particularly active in that. But when I taught an archaeology in the Bible class for about 2 years, a little over 2 years. And as a part of that class, we compared wisdom texts from other areas to wisdom texts in the Bible. And the purpose of that endeavor was to open up the minds of the ministers and the pastors and the deacons, and because that pretty much were the people that were in the class, to the reality that the Bible existed in a cultural context, and that the people in the Bible and that the wisdom in the Bible was something that wasn't just unique to the Bible, but it was shared wisdom. It wasn't any other parts of the world. It was wisdom that was exchanged, because anytime you have people in contact with each other trading goods, they're also trading knowledge and they're trading genes. So that was kind of the point, to kind of make sure that we put the Bible in this larger context as not just a religious text, but as a historic text, as a book. And so one of the activities that we went, which, this is actually labeled for you guys, but what I did for them is I actually put these proverbs up, and I didn't say where they came from. And so Amenemope is an Egyptian wisdom text. And then, of course, our Proverbs. So what I did was I removed that it was a proverb or the Egyptian text, and I had them try to which one comes from the Proverbs, which ones come from the Bible. And it was very difficult. And as you can see from what I have on the screen, it is pretty difficult to do. Let me make that a little smaller for myself. So here's a proverb. Incline thine ear and hear the words of the wise, and apply thine heart to my doctrine. For it is pleasant if thou keep them in thy belly, that they may be established upon thy lips. And that's a proverb. And then one of the Egyptian proverbs, give thine ear and hear what I say, and apply thine heart to apprehend it. It is good for thee to place them in thine heart. Let them rest in the casket of thy belly, that they may act as a peg upon thy tongue. And so we'll see over and over that these proverbs and these Egyptian texts are pretty much saying the same thing, which is expected because the world was very connected. Especially that part of the world was very connected to other parts of the world. But then just in general, when we think of human experience, like be slow to anger. You don't have to be connected to a population to have that proverb, because we have centuries, we have millennia of people, of experiences watching people who are angry make bad decisions, right? And so different communities are going to come up with a similar proverb. Hey, be slow to anger because it's going to cause you some problems, right? Because we see that all around the world. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's a connection. Of course, in this case, with Egypt and the Middle East and being so close to each other, more than likely there is a connection, and they were sharing wisdom texts, but also just human experience in that area. So that was just something that I thought was pretty interesting in my class, because my students couldn't tell them apart. So, because we know the Bible, we know this, and we know that this is a special book, and not that it's not still special to a lot of people, not that it doesn't have, significance and kind of guiding people's lives and different things like that. But it is a book in a particular context of others that are also just as powerful, just as capable of guiding and instructing people in how they should live, and what they should and shouldn't do, and how should engage with other communities. So there's another one about robbing the poor. Rob not the poor, for he is poor, neither oppress or crush the lowly in the gate. Beware of robbing the poor and oppressing the afflicted. I mean, these same proverbs, these same text places. That Miss Diana wanted me to start with. I could send this to you all. I also have, and these are just some that I picked, but there's also a spreadsheet from the Journal of Pan-African Studies. I don't know if y'all have access to that. That includes like a little intro. It's very short. This is only about 4 pages. It includes a little intro on what the purpose of the text was, and then it gives you a lot of those proverbs. That's basically what this is. Do not be greedy for a plot of land. Better is bread when the mind is at ease than riches with anxiety. This one here. And so it's not very long. These texts were kind of buried in, I want to say, the British Museum for a while. But within the religious community, when we talk about scholars, people are still debating which one came first. Did biblical scholars borrow from the Egyptians or vice versa? Or, and I that's not necessarily how that happens, because cultures are really complex. So nothing ever happens one direction. So when you come in contact with another community, there's always this back and forth. And that's kind of how we taught history when we taught about like people of the African diaspora coming here. Then everybody's like, we don't have any culture. We just took everything from Europeans, but that's not true. When we think about food, when we think about certain language, when we think about certain agricultural practices, they didn't know how to, grow rice. They didn't have gumbo. They didn't have all these different things, right? And so cultures are always exchanging bi-directional. It's going both ways. So the debate is still up in the air on who borrowed from who, but I'm of the opinion that it went both ways anyway. So, because that's how culture is. It's never, even in an instance where you have a dominant group that's wielding all the power and a group that's not, there's still an exchange that goes both ways. Because the group that's wielding all the power, usually a colonial power, doesn't know how to survive in the new land that they came to anyway. So they're going to have to learn from the people who they're wielding that power over, right? And so they're learning ways, they're taking information and things from that people that they've now made a subordinate population. So there's always exchange both ways. But yeah, that's all. That's what she wanted me to start with. And then I know that she said y'all had questions about certain things. We talked about like indigenous people being Black, who's the first to discover the New World, air quotes. That would be North America, Central America, South America. But yeah, so if y'all have any questions, you can just
to
open the floor to questions.
To say that Proverbs, let's just pick that book, since that's what this first discussion is about. To say that it was plagiarized, you would say not really, because of the exchange of the cultures.
Of course. So plagiarism is when you take something from someone else and you don't give them credit for doing it. And unfortunately, most of history is plagiarized, especially before we started setting up a standard to where you had to give people credit for the information that we now know. So in this particular case, this is wisdom text. So a lot of this would have just been known just because of human experience. But then there also would have been certain sayings that people had that once you start exchanging goods and exchanging people and exchanging knowledge, it would have just flown over into that community. It's like borrowed words that we use from other communities. So when we engage with a new community and they don't have a word because they don't have something, like maybe they don't have internet, so why would they have a word for internet? But then they take that word and now they have internet, right? Like they have internet and they use the same word. They don't translate into another language. They borrowed the English word. It's internet, cell phone, all these different things like that. Is that plagiarism? Not really. I mean, they didn't have a word for it. They're actually just pulling in concepts that are new to them. And I would say the same thing here. Because I don't think that the goal was I don't think the goal was ownership originally, probably now, because everybody's like, no, my God wisdom only comes from God. And then we see the same wisdom text in other places where they weren't worshiping the same God, right? So yeah. I think that probably happened much later. But early on, it's more than likely just an exchange of information. Just like you exchange recipes, you exchange ideas, you exchange concepts. I mean, literally just that basic exchange. So, and the Proverbs were really just kind of written down the book of Proverbs and wisdom texts in general were just written down so that people could have access to this, so that you could kind of have it not necessarily in your back pocket because everybody couldn't read, right?
Mhm.
But so that as a community, you can have access to this wisdom text and you can use it just to guide people. And it could be used to guide people who don't believe in that particular faith or God or whatnot. The texts themselves are still very useful for people who don't believe in anything. So I think that would be really hard to prove, mostly because a lot of this is just going to come from human experience. We have a word in anthropology, like we have um diffusion, you use that word in other fields. When we use it in anthropology, we're talking about like this kind of exchange of things, right?
Mhm.
But then there's also just things that happen that have zero connection that are the same, right?
Mhm.
And that's just because of human experience. We've all come up with ways to structure what the household looks like, and it all centers around taking care of children because there's children in human populations. So there are
Yeah.
going to be similarities, but there are also going to be differences. And so it's anger is a human experience that people are going to have whether they come in contact with another group or not, and they're going to have to come up with a way to deal with it. They're going to have to come up with some knowledge to keep the youth, the younger people, from engaging in activities that would probably get them in trouble. So it's
Mhm.
just, I don't know. I wouldn't say plagiarism in this case. It's more just exchange,
Exchange.
concepts, ideas, experience, passing on knowledge, just like the elders passing on knowledge to the young people. That's really what Proverbs and wisdom texts were all about.
Hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Not really.
I think
Mhm.
where he's coming from, Dr. Wren, is today, moving it fast forward.
Uh,
Forward. Yeah, how we know that Africans, people of African descent, were the first people in the universe. So of course they're going to glean from us. Say, and I'm in healthcare, so we know the Hippocrates oath. We know what oath where that came from. We know that he learned from Imhotep. We know that they came to Egypt because Egypt was what America is today. So how so many people pattern themselves after people in America and the things that people do in America, so did the people during that time. And that's what you're saying as well. Did in Egypt. Egypt was the learning house, the powerhouse of that time frame. So Egypt was influenced. So we know that the Greek, the Macedonians, when they came into that particular area, they learned and gleaned from the knowledge that the Africans had. And when the Romans came in and took over, they of course learned what the Greeks had learned from the African and so forth, and it branched all out because we know that the Roman Empire was very large back in antiquity. So, and it spread abroad as to how we got those things today. So there was a great influence on the part of African history, the music, arts, language, and it's documented also by some of their historians that stated that the arts, the science, and so forth came from the African people.
Well, I think, it gets pretty complicated because we're talking about humans. We're talking about us, Homo sapiens sapiens. As far as the sciences are concerned, we originated in Africa, right? And
Right.
then from there, we moved to different places. And just because we moved to a different place doesn't mean that there wasn't this back and forth between people in different parts of the world and Africa, this constant back and forth, which we see in gene flow, but we also see it in culture. And culture would be the things that we create, religious beliefs, folklore, all these different things going back and forth. When it comes to knowledge, there are many ways of acquiring knowledge. And I think what you're hinting at or what you're getting at is that the impact, the influence of knowledge from the people in Africa, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, because people will give Egyptians credit for things, but they won't give sub-Saharan Africans credit for things. And so when we think about history today and we think about the narrative that is the dominant narrative, we tend to completely erase that influence when we talk about history, and everything came from Europe, right? It was somebody else. It wasn't Africa. There's no influence here. There's no connection to any of that. And I think that is definitely true. And that's what many people are starting to uncover today is that relationship and the knowledge. Oh, wait a minute. This came here and this was first. Even just the discovery, like zero. Zero was a Mayan thing. Europeans didn't discover zero. The Mayans did. They were the first to have zero. And so, but we don't talk about that in mathematics, right? We don't talk about the influence of, people in in the Middle East or Egypt when it comes to the scientific method. And we don't talk about that. And so, but that's 100% true. But when it comes to science, when it comes to knowledge in general, knowledge is something that is contextual because it's based on what you have available to you. It's like the example I gave of the internet. You're not going to have a word for the internet if you don't have the internet. You're not going to have a word for snow if you don't have snow. You're not going to have all the knowledge that comes with snow if you don't have snow. So when we talk about Inuit populations in the Arctic, they have 20 plus words for snow because it's life or death, because it's something that is very much present in their environment. Their narratives, their science, their knowledge is going to revolve around that environment. That wouldn't come from Africa. That would come from that environment. And so there's knowledge that's specific to different parts of the world that we now have today because we're exchanging that knowledge. So, but everyone is contributing, but we're not going to have the same knowledge because we don't live in the same environments, just right off the bat. It's the same thing with plants. So plants that are used to heal people in one environment are not going to be available in another environment because of the climate. If you live in a tropical environment, then you might have plants that are indigenous there that have been used for generations. It's like when colonizers came to North America and they encountered the indigenous people here, they had their own medicine men and women, and they were just fine dealing with the diseases that they'd encountered. But when Europeans came over, they brought new diseases. And indigenous people didn't have plants. They didn't have the knowledge. They didn't have what was needed to combat those new diseases.
Right.
Because those diseases came from somewhere else. And they had the knowledge, they had what was needed to combat those diseases. That's how knowledge works. That's how exchange works. Everything couldn't possibly come from one place because all places are different. All places are going to have different things available to them. They're going to have different climates. They're going to have the language is going to be different. Concepts are going to be different. And that exchange is really how we get a body of knowledge that really helps everybody. But on a global scale, we ignore the contribution of Black and brown people. Period.
Absolutely. And that's
what we do.
my main
Knowledge,
point.
and that's the problem. Yeah. So we're ignoring,
Absolutely.
and that's a large contribution, right? Because there are more Black and brown people than any other people. And so that's the knowledge that we tend to ignore. That's the knowledge that we tend, they didn't contribute anything here. They didn't contribute anything there. So, which is, and that's important to me. So when I do lecture on science or the scientific method, I include Al-Hazan, because Al-Hazan was instrumental in the scientific method. And he was brown. He was Middle Eastern. He moved from, I can't remember what country in the Middle East, but he ended up moving to Egypt. And he was instrumental in coming up with repeatability, which is part of that method. But no one ever gave him credit. You wouldn't know about him if someone who cared about history and who cared about the other contributors of history and these things that we hold near and dear didn't mention them, like me in my classes. You would think that our scientific method is a European thing and it only came from Europeans and now we use it here, and that's just not true. It was influenced by people in the Middle East. It was influenced by African scholars and also women.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But
absolutely. And so I think it is right time that we tell our story, as so many people say, because we have been left out of history, though. So it is our time to tell our story and tell it in the correct contextual manner, and to attribute those things that we contributed as melanated people to society. And thank you for bringing up sub-Saharan Africa, or the lower Africa, because people do forget that, but we on this platform, we know that they started in the southern part of Africa and they moved up the Nile Valley River. So Egypt, the things that they attribute to Egypt came actually from there, but that's neither here nor there. We're not talking about that. It's just, I was glad that you brought that point up about that, because they do tend to forget about that particular region, knowing that that's where it started from.
Well, and Egypt would have been a very diverse place anyway, because of its location on the Nile, but also its location on the Mediterranean. So the Sahara Desert has always been a geographical barrier that's kept people from moving across, that boundary. You have Sub-Sahara, and then you have Northern Africa. And today, that same desert is being used as a graveyard. We try to push people who are trying to make their way to Europe through the Sahara because we know that they probably won't make it and they'll die. We're using that and the Mediterranean Sea to kill people. Millions of people are dying. Today we use that as a barrier. It was used as a barrier in the past. So the not having the Nile River that connects northern Africa all the way to the Mediterranean, but through to sub-Saharan Africa is what made Egypt so prominent of a location. There's water there, but there's water there in two ways, the Mediterranean and the Nile, and then all the little tributaries that come off of that. And so Egypt itself would have been a space where people from all around the world came together, whether that was sub-Saharan Africa, Europe, the Middle East, people from all over would have came together in Egypt. And that's the real history of Egypt. The real history of Egypt is people of many different faiths, many people of many different, backgrounds, languages, cultures. That was what Egypt would have looked like. And so the influence, I mean, even people from different parts of Asia would have been in Egypt, all over the place. And then when we expand it, when you move on from, Egypt being this great city center to the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, all of these different things, that influence wouldn't have waned, and the things that were gleaned from Egypt as a mega power in a city center would have still been around. And the Roman Empire was well aware of that. So the Roman Empire really didn't move into places and try to eradicate like we see colonization today, because this was colonization. What the Romans did was colonization. Colonization is old. So, but what the Romans did that's different from what we saw in this last wave of colonization is they didn't attempt to eradicate the people there. They included them in the Roman dynamic. Now, what that doesn't mean is that, you had the same privileges as everybody else, right? But they didn't try to get rid of the language. They didn't even try to force people to worship a particular way necessarily. You could maintain your culture, but it was more so about taxes. It was more so about taxes, there's slavery, but as far as the culture was concerned, you didn't really see that whole this whole movement to eradicate or forcibly assimilate a people group. And I think that's probably why the Roman Empire was able to be as vast as it was. What that doesn't mean is that the Roman Empire, obviously, when we think about even just the Bible, didn't have a large hand in oppressing people. Oppression is one thing, but oppressing their culture is another thing. And the Romans didn't do a lot of that. They really allowed people to worship how they wanted to worship, to maintain their culture, but the taxes were probably the most important part of the Roman Empire. So the taxes, the labor, still an oppressive empire. But yeah, like it's culture is not, it doesn't move it just doesn't move one way. It's like Miss Diana was asking me about who discovered the New World, North America, Central America, South America first. And I was like, that's a really difficult, it's not a difficult question. It's just that as archaeologists, we only know what we find. So the moment we find something new is the moment we know something new. The moment we can push dates back, the moment we can say, oh, well, actually. So recently, within the last 20 years, we found, well, not really, but we acknowledged that, there are potatoes, sweet potatoes in Papua New Guinea. It's very important to their community. But sweet potatoes are indigenous to South America. All potatoes are. So how did Papua New Guinea get sweet potatoes? There's a huge ocean between South America and Papua New Guinea, the Pacific Ocean. Not just a creek, but an ocean, right? And they've had sweet potatoes for over 10,000 years. So that knowledge. And then when we started to accept the reality that people all around the world, whether that's sub-Saharan Africa or Asia or, thousands of years, 10,000, 20,000 years ago, were extremely intelligent people, right? Because we tend to think we're the most intelligent, but we've lost a lot of knowledge from our ancestors. There's been a lot of knowledge that pretty much died with them or was forcibly wiped out, burned, destroyed. When we think about groups like, okay, these people have sweet potatoes. They had to cross an ocean to bring it here. And then we start to realize, wait a minute, they had technology in Melanesia where they could, on these little canoes, they were already crossing, they were circumnavigating the globe, right? And they were doing this for thousands of years. And then we add to that the genetic data that we found and the morphological data that we found. Some of our oldest human remains are in South America, in Patagonia, the tip of South America. And people weren't just kind of hovering around the coast making their way here. What we know now is not only were they in South America, probably about 15,000 years ago. We keep pushing the date back because we keep finding more data. But many of the people that were here in the New World, their morphology was Aboriginal or African. And we know that. And we also know that the majority of the populations that came were more Southeast Asian because we have genetic data. We also know that Europeans were here. The Vikings were here. Even if they only touched the top part of North America, they were here. So when we talk about populating the New World, it was something that happened from all over the globe. And it happened, right now we could say at least 17,000 years, but it's probably earlier than that because many of the sites that we would have access to are underwater because the glaciers have now melted. The glaciers that, we have, and we're still going through this now, but it was an interglacial period and we're still in an interglacial period. And so some of the sites that we could assess, and we do have underwater archaeology, are underwater. So the New World was populated by people from Papua New Guinea. They made it here. They got sweet potatoes. People from Africa, people from Europe, people from Asia. All of the old world was actually moving this direction. And it makes a lot of sense because we'd spent over 250,000 years on the other continents that we needed to go somewhere else. You only have a couple options when you encounter a new people, because when you take over a population and you take over a land, eventually you're going to run out of space, right? As the population grows. And so you can decide to form an allegiance, you can decide to fight or ignore or avoid each other. And if you decide to do that, you need to find something else. And so the New World, North America, was that something else that everyone was coming to. But that's not a narrative that you tend to hear. You tend to hear people came from Asia, Bering Strait, right? It opened up, and then this is one group that came here. But we know as scientists that people were coming from other parts of the world, and they had the ability to circumnavigate the globe with their canoes and the knowledge that they had of the weather, of the water, of the animals. They were doing that. And as archaeologists, we've actually helped reconstruct those canoes and that knowledge, because that's kind of what we do, excavating. And so we've actually helped populations do that today in those same canoes using that same technology successfully. So we know they were doing it. So
wow.
Melanated people, not just Europeans. We're doing them.
Awesome.
Anybody else have any questions or comments on the what has been discussed so far? Or any questions for Dr. Wren?
Yes, I have a question for Dr. Wren.
Mm-hmm.
So the Africans, and they have found evidence that the Africans are millions of years old before the Europeans came on the scene. How is it that we cannot understand that the Africans circumvented the whole planet? They were in Europe, they were in Asia, they were all over. And not only in canoes, but the Africans were known as building great ships for trade.
Mm-hmm.
Why are we as Africans, why do we condense our history to involve everyone else before they came on the scene? Africans have been here for what? Millions of years on the planet?
No, I would say no. And I would say the hard no, because I'm a scientist. So, and the only reason why I would say a hard no is because Homo sapiens sapiens, that's who we all are as humans, have only been here for about 300,000 years as a species, as a group. Now, when it comes to hominins, so as a biological anthropologist, hominins in Africa have been here, depending on who you ask, we go back about 7 million years. And that's in Africa. Those were the first hominins. I think that's probably what you're getting at. 7 million years. 7 million years you go back.
Millions
And we,
So yeah, so
yeah.
7.
So, but
that's a lot of
7.
years.
Oh yeah, but 7 million years ago, we didn't have the capabilities we have today, and we didn't look the way we look today. So 7 million years ago, we would have been bipedal like we are today. We walk on 2 legs. We would have had a smaller body form, but we would not have had the technology that we have. We would have been very much like some of the great as far as behavior. So we don't have that connection. Like 10 million ago, it's not us today. They're smaller. I mean, they weren't doing the same things that we're doing. But then you move forward and you get to 2 million years ago. 2 million is a good space, because at 2 million, can you guys hear me? Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
I know my internet. It was like internet unstable. Okay.
It was.
So about 2
Yeah, it was
million years
breaking up
ago,
just
I
a
live in
little
the
bit.
country. I live in the country. My neighbor's a cow, so if something happens, I'll be back. But about 2 million, yeah, because that's what happens when you live in the country. Your internet is like, we don't know if we like you today. But 2 million years ago is going to be a prime number. About 2 million years ago, we have Homo erectus. Homo erectus is in Africa. Homo erectus, 2.1 million years ago, was the first of the genus Homo. We're Homo sapiens. Homo erectus was the first of the genus Homo to leave Africa. What we know before Homo erectus left Africa is we know that Australopiths, who are also hominins, they come before. They have smaller brains. They're not doing a lot of tool technology, but they were using some of the oldest tools, and they are Olduvon tools. And this is all in Africa. Everything was taking place in Africa for 5 million years before anyone ever left Africa. But that history
was my point. That was my point.
But they were not us. They were not Homo sapiens sapiens, and they were not circumnavigating the globe yet. They didn't have the ability to do so. They didn't even have the brain capacity to do so. Their technology was very limited. They were making basically what we consider our oldest and most simplest form of tools. They were Olduvon tools. And so it's basically when you take a rock and you take off just like, so if my hand is the rock, I would only take off this part and the other part because I could use it as a scraper and a cutter. That was about that was about the extent of our technological advancements for about 5 million years. Well, actually, we only go back 3.5 million years with that stone tool, but it could have been earlier because we only know what we find. But with Homo erectus, and this is why I fast forward.
Exactly. And I was going to say that in lieu of what you stated earlier, is based upon what they have found, because we know that over Africa, there's areas that they can't even get to because it's underground. So it's just based on what they.
Oh, that's what we do.
Today. So
we dig underground. That's what archaeologists are doing. Caves and everything.
I'm talking about deeper than caves. Deeper. I'm talking about. I'm not talking about caves.
Yeah,
we're saying deeper down up under the ground that they can't get to, and they haven't gotten to yet. So we're limited.
Yeah, so
to that perspective.
We're limited. We're limited to access, and then like I'm having to update my course stuff every year because we're always finding new things.
Right.
But about 2 million years ago, we have Homo erectus, and Homo erectus had our body size basically. Homo erectus was making more advanced tools, and Homo erectus left Africa. Homo erectus, as far as we know, was the first member of the genus Homo to leave Africa. Homo erectus didn't look like us up here, though. Homo erectus looked like us from shoulder down. But when you looked at Homo erectus' face, their frontal lobe wasn't fully developed, so they didn't have a forehead. It just kind of went straight back. Their head was more rated. They really huge ridges. The frontal lobe is probably one of the last things to develop. Humans today, Homo sapiens today, what makes us unique and what sets us apart from any other member of the genus Homo in the past is we have a forehead, we have a chin, and we have an extremely large brain in comparison to our body size. That sets us apart from many other animals. And it's that really large brain that has allowed us to manipulate the materials on Earth and make all these things that we've made, plastic. I mean, all of these different things. And also our hands. They're prehensile, they're grasping hands, and we have this thumb, which is also you combine that with this big brain, and we're just, we can pretty much do anything. And so far, that's the consensus. And as far as the data is concerned, for over 100 years, all we know is that Homo erectus is the first one to leave out of Africa. Everybody came out of Africa. That's not even a question. Only a handful of people are still arguing, well, and they're not arguing based on science. They're arguing based on how they feel. So based on the data, we all came out of Africa. We originated in Africa, and then Homo erectus leaves Africa and occupies Asia for the most part. Not so much. There's Homo erectus close to Europe, but there's something different happening in Europe, and that would be Neanderthals. But that comes later. So Homo erectus is also the longest living member of the genus Homo. Homo erectus survived for up until about 100,000 years ago. That's our most recent evidence of Homo erectus on some islands outside of off the coast of, I want to say, I think it might be Java. So about 100,000 years ago. So Homo erectus was here for like 2 million years. Homo sapiens, us, with our big brains and all this other stuff, we've only been here for about 300,000 years, as far as the evidence is concerned. We used to think it was 2, but then we keep finding things, and we keep pushing that date back. Now, we also originated in Africa. When it comes to circumnavigating the globe, that pushing that back millions of years, we have no archaeological evidence that humans were building large ships or vessels. They weren't even making advanced tools up until the last probably about 100,000 years. Prior to that, what that doesn't mean is that we obviously were moving places, and we were able to cross water as well because we were on islands. But what I'm talking about is evidence. And when we go back millions of years, I have zero evidence. But we know that Homo erectus was already in Asia, already in Europe. We know that Homo erectus made it to islands. We have tons of evidence, tons of skeletal remains from different islands that were still separated by water, right? Because we haven't always been separated by water. Some of these islands were closer, but they were separated by water at the time they were occupied. So we know that we had to be made something, but that wouldn't push us back, millions and millions. That would only push us back, several 100,000 years of crossing water to get to these islands. We just don't have any evidence of what they used to do that. It would have had to been something, right? A boat, a canoe, something that they were using. They were moving around, and I just can't. I can't say with evidence millions of years ago. Mm-hmm.
Oh, thank you very much for that response. But moving around in canoes, it doesn't seem logical to feed the water of the ocean in a canoe.
Well, they're doing it today, though.
And not being
they're circumventing the globe in canoes right now with no modern technology
and big ship, because from my understanding they were traders. They didn't trade bulks of trade and supplies in a canoe.
No. Yeah, they would have had to use ships. I'm just saying we don't have any evidence they were doing that millions of years ago. That's what we don't have. We don't us as members of the genus Homo, we don't even have evidence that we were on the continent of North America and South America 1 million years ago. We have zero evidence. The earliest evidence of humans being on this continent dates back to about 17,000 years ago. Like, it is the most recent occupation of this landmass. That's as early as we have. We know that we were here earlier, though. And we know we were here earlier because we were in Beringia 32,000 years ago. And Beringia is that Arctic area where people started crossing, but it's on Russia. It's on the Russian side. And so we were already there 32,000 years ago. If we were there 32,000 years ago, we were definitely here. We just don't have evidence that we were here until about 17,000 years ago. So when we start to push back millions, we have zero evidence that anyone anywhere millions of years ago were making canoes or ships. We have zero evidence. As far as our brain development, our brains were 20% the size they are right now. We basically had the same size of a chimpanzee brain. So, I mean, as far as that's the evidence for that far back. But as far as Africans making ships, and of course we were making ships. Of course we were circumnavigating the globe. Like you said, we needed ships to move goods, but we were already circumnavigating the globe before we had ships. We were circumnavigating the globe in just canoes. We were moving things, and not necessarily goods, but people were moving. Bodies were moving. Bodies were moving places to explore new lands. And that's how Papua New Guinea gets sweet potatoes. Somebody went to Central America over 10,000 years ago, found some sweet potatoes, brought it back, and now it's their main source of food for their pigs in particular and for trade. So we know that people were moving. We know that Africans had empires. We had mathematics, we had astronomy, we had all of these things that people don't like to talk about. We had universities. We had these. Say
We
that
had
we
every
had it millions of years ago is to push the human, our species, somewhere that we have no evidence, like nobody anywhere, as far as the evidence is concerned, and as far as our brain size is concerned, we're doing any of those things. Not millions of years ago. But
right.
who had it first?
Yeah.
The who had it first? Art. Some of our earliest art is definitely in Africa, but it would make sense because we art. You can take art back millions of years, but as far as the more advanced technology, we haven't been able to take it back millions of years. So when it comes to art, Africa had it first. People who don't know the archaeology are debating that, but the people who know, we're not debating that. Africa had it first.
Yeah.
Africa has the oldest cave.
Thank you for
Africa.
thank you for the answering that question. So what you're saying, as the research goes on and things are unveiled,
Mhm.
they will find out the truth in who we were and where we came from and how long we've been on this earth, doing science, math, so forth and so on. But you have to discover it first, is what you're
Yes,
saying.
and that's the thing. And what you're oral narratives, we call, oral narratives or folklore have a lot of value to them. We used to ignore them until we realized that if we, as archaeologists, investigated some of the claims that people were making, we might actually find new sites. We might actually be able to confirm some of these narratives. And it turns out that a lot of the oral narratives, at least with indigenous people in North America, are like correct. Like we started listening and we started recording these narratives, and then we're like, okay, let's see if what they say, because they're like, no, we came here, we stayed here, and we did these things, and then we moved into this area, and then we moved here, and it's like, oh, it's just a origin story or blah blah blah. And then eventually archaeologists were like, let's see if there's any truth to this. So we started to dig in those places where they said they came from. We started to retrace their steps, and it turns out they were 100% true. It turns out that all the data supported the narrative that these people were saying, and that they maintained that narrative for millennia, over 10,000, years. These people were maintaining this narrative without having to write it down. And that comes from a bias, a Eurocentric bias, that you have to write everything down. In many communities, you have groups, clans, where it's their job to be the historians. Yes.
Yes.
So they're the ones who record the history exactly. They have to remember it. They have to memorize it. And then that is that clan's job. And you see that in many different parts of the world. So archaeologists today, we don't just use text, obviously, because we can go beyond text. We go back millions of years, but we also include oral narratives now when we are assessing, populations and who's been here and who came here, who wasn't. Now we're using that. And so there's a lot that can be learned from listening to folklore. But when it comes to, my only point was, when it comes to millions of years, we weren't us millions of years ago. We, in many ways, our brain size wasn't as large as it is. We had no frontal lobe development. which is where reason and logic and things like that come from. Probably even the belief in the afterlife, because with the development of the frontal lobe that gives us a forehead, we started seeing people actually use mortuary rituals when they bury people, as opposed to just burying them to keep them away from scavengers. We started seeing people being buried in particular ways with particular things. And so that kind of might point to some belief in an afterlife, but that happened with the development of our frontal lobe. And so we were not the same. We, as far as I'm concerned, yeah, that's us. We've just evolved over millions of years. But what we were capable of millions of years ago doesn't even touch the surface of what we're capable of today with this larger brain that we have. So, okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, if nobody else have a question, I have a question from your perspective of anthropology. As far as, because I know what some say in the journals. So I want to get your take on it. As far as the field melanin and eumelanin, what was the year that we started seeing the people that had field melanin, meaning the more white-skinned people, European, more, those that are black or brown? What is the time frame that you see?
Okay. So this is actually something that we do study in anthropology because it's important to discussions of race and racialization. People have used skin color to do that. So skin color is on a spectrum or a cline. That's the word that we use. So you have people who are albino where they have no melanin, and then you have anything in between till you get to the darkest person, right? But when it comes to fair skin, that's a recent development because we evolved in Africa, more melanin is where we started. We started with more melanin. But it's important to understand that in any population, even when we were in Africa, there has to be variation. So you're going to have people who are a little bit darker and people who are a little bit lighter. But when it comes to what we saw in Europe, that developed later. So we had melanin beginning in Africa. We were darker skinned. We were darker skinned millions of years ago. We were darker skinned 300,000 years ago. We were darker skinned 200,000. We were darker skinned. We start to see the way that skin color became lighter is people left Africa. When populations leave Africa, and any population, again, you're going to have variation, just like you do in a family, right? You have people who have a little bit lighter skin, people with a little bit darker skin. So once people started leaving Africa, the people who had the lighter skin, it wasn't white. Nobody has white skin anyway, but it wasn't what we think of as
That's why I said
European
eumelanin and field melanin,
right?
but I wanted them to know what I was saying.
So, what happened is within that population, now that they're in a different environment, skin color is directly related to UV radiation. So, there's a particular type of UV radiation that one that we need to help us develop vitamin D. So the reason we started out melanated in the first place in Africa is because Africa is getting hit by this UV radiation constantly and in large amounts. So melanin protects us from too much UV radiation, because if it in skin cancer, and it would folate in our skin, which we need for sperm production. But if we don't get some of that, then we wouldn't develop vitamin D, which would mean we would have brittle bones and we'd have other problems. So melanin does two things. It allows for enough radiation to come so that we can produce vitamin D, but it also protects us from too much radiation so that we have folate, so that we have good sperm production in our populations. Okay?
So how long does it take?
As populations move out of Africa. Yeah, so as populations move out of Africa, you have variation in skin color. You have lighter skinned people and darker skin, but not the same color as we see Europeans today. All right, that's not how that started. But what did happen is the people with the darker skin died off, and they died off because now they're in an environment where they're not getting as much UV radiation, but they have darker skin, and their skin, the melanin in their skin, is not allowing enough UV radiation to get through to help with vitamin D production. And so they are dying from a lack of vitamin D, which we continue to see throughout colonization until we came up with vitamins, because people were dying of rickets. People with darker skin in the northern hemispheres were dying of rickets because of our skin color not allowing what little bit of radiation was hitting that part of the world to get through and help us produce vitamin D. That also happened in the past. So the darker skin individuals were dying off anyway. They weren't fit for those environments. And with every population, the people who had the lighter skin are going to be more fit. And so what we see over time in Europe is that there is a selection for people with lighter skin. So you have a population that varies. The darker skinned people die off. Now you only have the lighter skinned people. That next generation, the lighter skinned people, again, are more fit because they can take in more UV radiation in those environments, so they can produce vitamin D. So they're not going to have problems having kids and with growth and development. And so this is what happened in Europe. This is what happened with all of the skin colors that are fair around the globe. That's how that happens. It's you're selecting for people who are more fit in those environments. That was we started out with dark skin. We started out melanated. Just if anybody wants to know, we started out melanated, and then when we started to leave, when we Africa, our skin color evolved in lieu of our environment. It was selected.
So how long did
Our
that
skin was
process
selected.
take? How many years do the
Oh, that
anthropologists?
would have taken thousands because Neanderthal would have been had some melanin nearly as they had in Africa, but they still would have had the melanin. And then when we look at new discoveries of people in Europe, they're darker skin, and people are like, oh my God, even Mediterranean will still have dark. North Africa still have darker skin. Fairer skin is going to be closer to the Arctic. Can y'all hear me?
We can now. You were breaking up.
Okay. Okay. So the fairer skin is going to be closer to the Arctic, and environments. It's all about UV radiation. Environments where they're not getting as much UV radiation. But when we get to like indigenous people that live in the Arctic, many of them also eat raw meat. So even though they have fairer skin than us, they still have darker skin because they're getting their vitamin D from eating raw meat. So there wasn't a pull for them. There wasn't a selective pressure for people who had less melanin, or less melanin to be selected for, because they were eating raw meat, and so everybody was getting the vitamin D that they needed. And so those populations are actually darker than, let's say, people in Finland, people in Sweden, people really high north where they have really, really fair skin. So there are different, but it would have taken thousands of years for sure. For sure. Evolution, the selective pressures of natural selection they don't happen in 100 years. I mean, they can start in small increments, but you're going to start seeing a real difference probably it would take millennia. Yeah. Which is kind of sad, because what it means is, and what we've seen in even like populations that now have that can metabolize arsenic, when we look at the archaeological record, we see so many individuals dying before the individuals who had the genetic makeup to be able to metabolize arsenic spread out and became a larger part of that population. Until today, everybody in those populations can metabolize arsenic. But when we look in the archaeological record, we see so many people in their population, their mortality rate was so high until that happened. That would have been the same thing when people moved into Europe. A lot of people would have died off. And until their skin colors basically were light enough to survive in that space.
So how old are they saying Cheddar Man is?
I don't remember. Let me see. I know because Cheddar Man is, they were mad about Cheddar Man because he's melanated, but
right.
But it makes sense that Cheddar Man was melanated. Also, skin color. Today we live in shelters. Early on we lived in caves and whatever was rock shelters, things like that. But we have clothes to cover our skin, right, to protect our skin from the sun. We build things. So fairer skin is also today attributed to all the protections that we have. Oh, Cheddar Man. Was he found in England?
I
He
don't
was found
remember
in the UK, right?
what particular part of Europe he was found in. I can't recall. Let me see.
I think it was the UK. I think they were. Yeah, he was found in England.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
And so with the DNA analogy that they use, um, what is the age of the time frame that they saying that Cheddar Man lived in? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
They have on here, let's see, the 9th century BC. So that would have been about 11,000 years ago.
Okay. So then with that being said, we know that Cheddar
Mhm.
Man was dark skinned, melanated, and that was about
Fetterman was melanated. Yeah,
right. It's 11,000.
for sure.
That's why I was asking the question. How long is that process?
Mhm.
Because me personally, I don't gravitate towards environmental change. Respect everybody's opinion. I go towards the DNA perspective of the eumelanin and the melanin because if it was thousands of years, he was thousands of years old, but yet he was still melanin.
Yes.
Yes. Mhm. Mhm.
So that's why I
And
asked
also
the question because as they say,
the
we know
relationship between
the longer they dig, the deeper they dig, the blacker they get. The longer they
Yeah.
dig, the deeper they dig, the blacker
well,
they get.
people, yes, as you go back in time, I mean, the reality is, again, we started out dark skinned. So Cheddarman is not a surprise to scientists. Cheddarman might be a surprise to Europeans who want to think that everybody was, fairer skinned, but that doesn't even make sense. But also melanin and DNA. So DNA is going to create, so think of like a bell curve, right? And so you have this bell curve that goes up and then goes down. Our genetics tell us our potential. So whether that's skin color, height, hair, these are polygenic traits. So polygenic traits are going to be influenced by the environment. They're going to be influenced by DNA. But then the other type of traits, Mendelian traits, are only influenced by DNA. Skin color is not a Mendelian trait. So you can't dismiss the environment. It's a polygenic trait, which means environment is going to play a role on that expression. So that's why when I talk about so if we think about skin color and we think about genetically, we think about that bell curve for polygenic traits. What that means is there's a range. So that means that in this one person, there's a range. Their skin color could be this to that. It's the same thing with height. They could be 6 feet tall. That could be the peak of the bell curve, but they could also be 5'2". But it's going to depend on environment, what they reach. So that's why you have children who are coming from Mexico, Guatemala. They come here, people come here. They had 2 kids in Guatemala. They're 5 feet tall. Then they come here and the environment is different. Now they have access to all of this food, all this nutrition, and then they have a child here and that child is 6 feet tall. That child that was 5 feet tall had the potential to be 6, but the environment didn't allow for it. Those are
Yes, and
polygenic
I
traits.
agree with that, and that is true. Yes,
Yeah,
that is
but that's how skin
based on the
color
gene
works too.
expression of that.
Yes. So with skin color, you have to take genetics and the environment. That's why when we discuss skin color, we have to discuss, well, the environment itself it plays a big role on skin color because even if we didn't have vitamins, people that are my skin color and darker, and we see this even historically when they brought slaves over. People were dying. We were dying of rickets in Great Britain. We were dying of rickets in the northern parts of the States and in Canada. We didn't have vitamins, but our skin was too dark, so we couldn't get enough UV radiation to produce vitamin D. We were dying of rickets. The rate of rickets in the African diaspora populations that were in the northern hemisphere was extremely high until the advent of vitamins. And so that would have happened in the past. Those people would have died off. The fairer skinned people would have survived better, and then they just would have evolved lighter skin, been selected for lighter skin. That's how it works. Because it's a polygenic trait. All those traits that we use to racialize people are polygenic traits. Every single one of them: skin color, the width of your nose, your hair texture, even eye shape, it's on a cline. All of these traits are polygenic. Most traits are polygenic. Very few traits are only influenced by genetics. Very few. Albinism is one that's Mendelian and is only influenced by genetics, not the environment. But for the most part, you have to take both into consideration. But yeah, no. So Cheddar Man being 11,000 years old makes sense. Yeah. Because it's going to take thousands of years. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I know why it's such a big deal because we live in a world that is very much racialized. And, you have black, white, now we have brown. We've given all these different terms. But because of that, people get so offended when they find people who are melanated. And melanated doesn't mean black. Melanated doesn't mean African. Melanated means melanated. Melanated means you have more melanin in your skin because they're Asian people have, Indian people are darker than me, some of them. And so black, the term black that we use today is a term that has a history behind it. It has a history that dates back to the colonies, and those were corporations really, because the whole point of them was to extract, exploit, and send it back to the crown. And so we have these colonies, people come here, and they didn't even use the term black. When you look at the documents in Virginia, some of the old colonial documents, you didn't even see black and white. You saw Christian and non-Christian. You saw English, Irish, whatever. But African people were already here. They were here before 1619. They'd already brought them over as indentured servants, just not in large numbers. So they were already here. But slavery, lifelong perpetual servitude or slavery, didn't exist early on in the colonies either. Everybody was an indentured servant. Most of them were Irish. And then you have, over time, you have Europeans saying the Irish weren't really working out. They looked too much like them. If they escaped, they really couldn't tell them apart. It was just too much. So then they went to Africa and they said, well, maybe we should pull most of our people from Africa. So the transatlantic slave trade starts. But there were already Black people here before that. There were Black people here almost 100 years before 1619 as indentured servants. That population of people had interbred with many of the Europeans that were here in the colonies. In their records, they didn't know what to do with them. So they kicked them out of the colonies. And we didn't discover the descendants of that population until about 4 years ago. The Melungeons of East Tennessee. They're the Melungeons of East Tennessee. So the Melungeon group, they thought that they were Portuguese until a geneticist assessed their DNA and realized that their African ancestry predates slavery. So the people they kicked out of the colonies, their ancestors are the Melungeons. And they were given another narrative because for 400 years, people who had one drop Black could be enslaved. So they were given the narrative that they were Portuguese to survive. And that's what they believed until about 4 years ago when they were like, nope. You're African, but not that you predate that the whole system that we set up for lifelong perpetual slavery, which really wasn't set up until the early 1600s. But we were already here with colonies and stuff in the 1500s. Right. And so with that, what we start seeing in the record is we start seeing African become Black. Because before that, if you profess Jesus, they couldn't keep a Christian slave. They couldn't keep, so a lot of people from Africa were coming over and they were, oh, well, let me just say Jesus and then I'll be free. And that wasn't good for business. So then they had to come up with another way to keep people. And then they came up with Black being, instead of you being African or non-Christian, now you were Black. And then they had to define white. And that's really what set the standard for what Black was. And white was defined by white women. And then they put up all these rules, these laws really about access to white women. So no one could have access to white women but white men. Then they had to define what white men look like because not every European person was white because the Irish weren't because they were Catholic. So what they really meant were Anglo-Saxon, wealthy, Protestant Europeans that speak English or Germanic language, right? So it was a very specific group that had access to whiteness. And then they had to come up with a reason because they were Christian, right? They had to come up with a reason to justify slavery. And that's where we get all these ideologies that Black people are inferior, that Black people, that Africans are inferior. Well, they called us Black by now at this time. So Black people are inferior. They are savages. They would pillage and rape if we didn't do this. And all these different things. They had to come up with an ideology. And then 200 years later, you fast forward to the 1800s, anthropologists are actually perpetuating this. we were used to push eugenics, to push all of these ideologies. They use us to racialize groups, to decide who and where people went on the hierarchy, really up until the 1960s. With the civil rights, 1950s, with the civil, well, there were anthropologists older than that were already moving away from that. But particularly during the civil rights movement is when anthropologists shifted to activists and not the people the scientists that were helping, because it wasn't even science, it was pseudoscience. So helping the government push this narrative, we shifted from that to, wait a minute, all of that's wrong. Let's use real facts and data and not keep perpetuating this narrative that just doesn't even make any sense. There's no evidence for it. There's no data. And that shift didn't happen until like the 50s and 60s. But so finding someone who's melanated in Europe doesn't mean they're Black. It means that they're melanated European, because they're supposed to be. Like, you know, melanin is the foundation of of Homo sapiens. We would not have survived without this melanin. And now it's benefiting us because the global, with climate change and the world getting hotter, you know, it's a benefit to have melanin. We know that people from Europe who move to Australia, they have one of the highest rates of skin cancer because they don't have enough melanin.
Yeah. They were number two. First, it was Israel that was number one with the highest rate, until they came up with all the initiatives to help protect them from the harmful rays of the. So we know that they're not.
Are you talking about the European? You're talking about the European Jews that went back to Israel? Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Not the Jews.
Yeah, that's why I was saying that used to be number one, and Australia was number two. And because they came up with this a plan to help decrease that rate, they decreased down on that totem.
I wonder how they.
Yeah,
I don't know anything about that, but that's why I asked if is it European Jews, because Jews that never left still have melanin. They're darker skin.
Oh, absolutely. We're aware of that. They may not.
Yeah, so that's what makes
I want people to know it.
Well, no, I mean, you know, that not every Jewish person left that part of the world, because there wasn't an Israel until World War II. As far as a country, there was always an Israel as a people, but the country wasn't created until World War II, until the end of World War II. Because, I mean, the reality is, you know, everybody knew what was happening in Germany. Everybody knew what the Nazis were doing. And even in the US, we were sending Jews. They were coming to our borders and we weren't allowing them in. And so they ended up having to go to other places. And so to kind of, as far as I'm concerned, to make up for the fact that we knew what was happening, we knew that a genocide was occurring, the United States and many other European countries got together, basically took control of a piece of land and designated it Israel. And that's how Israel was created. I feel like it was more so, you know, out of guilt, really. I think that our government did it out of guilt. But the Jewish people that never left, the Jewish people that never left, they have more melanin, but that's what happens. You know, you move to a place, you interbreed, and because they're interbreeding with people with lighter skin, and it would benefit them to have lighter skin in Europe too, right? It's less UV radiation. They're going to need that lighter skin to get as much UV radiation. But then returning to a place, a new country, Israel, you have millions of European Jews.
The information that I researched it says differently. It has nothing to do with them feeling guilty that they created it. It was political. It was politically motivated.
Oh, that you mean the U.S.?
I'm talking about them, and I'm talking about the Jews.
No, and that's why I said my opinion. My opinion. Can y'all? I can't hear you.
Okay.
Say that one more time.
No, I was saying that as far as America, you said America, or all the countries that was involved in that war felt guilty, and that's why they.
Okay, hold on one second. I'm gonna switch my internet to my phone because I do want to hear you, and I don't know if you can hear me, but I can't hear you that well.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, give me 1 second. I'm gonna switch my internet over so I can hear y'all.
Okay.
Nope. You right, Nigel. I saw your comment. Nope.
Nigel should ask that. She should raise that question, or that statement, rather.
I'm sorry, y'all. If you all keep seeing me looking up, there's a smoke alarm that's beeping and it's driving me crazy. So, so I keep looking up, trying to.
I understand. Okay, can y'all? Okay, go ahead. Trying to turn it off.
Yes.
Can
Okay,
you?
go ahead and say what you were saying because I can hear you now.
Okay. So I was saying in lieu of your statement that you believe, I think you said you believe that the reason why they did that, created Israel, is because of out of guilt. I said, based upon my research with the Rothschild family, we know it was politically motivated. It had nothing to do with guilt.
Oh, well, that's what I mean. But when I say political motive, when you say political motivation usually means we did it because financial reasons. We were embarrassed. It was
No,
going to make us look
how
good.
can you yourself create something for yourself and it's guilt? They did that. When you go back and really research those European Jews, they even orchestrated that war. When you go back and research how they manipulated the information, like who won, and caused even the market to crash over there with that false information. And they was getting ready to sign a peace treaty, and the Rothschilds intervened and said, don't do it, according to what I have read, and said that we can bring the U.S. in because the U.S. was not in it at originally in the beginning of it. And so the Rothschilds said, we can bring the U.S., the Americans, into it. And they went to the British and said this. And so the Rothschilds did this politically, who are European Jews, and they came up with the Balfour Declaration, which were the British, because they wanted that land. They're not from that land. They're East European.
No. Well, I mean, they are ancestors of people who are from that space. That particular.
Oh, it's not according to the DNA analysis. They are not. Even their own people, their scientists, Elkhart, proved this with the DNA analysis. They come from East European, and they also have who that DNA is it? I can't remember offhand, not from my research, but according to their DNA, that is inaccurate. That is not correct. They have European descent, is where they're from.
They're mostly European descent. That's not being argued that they are. That's why I said European Jews, and then I've mentioned Jews that never left.
Who are the original have no connection with the Europeans.
That is, yeah, that's a whole nother argument.
Okay,
that I'm not really. I have there, I mean, yeah, but as far as Israel as a people, that they've always existed, but Israel as a country, my only argument is what we did as a country and what many other countries did after World War II, after this mass genocide, is we did it out of guilt. And then that doesn't mean that there wasn't also political reasons for basically stealing a piece of land, setting a border, and designating it a country. But I think a lot of people don't know that. I think a lot of people, actually, I know a lot of people don't know that, that wasn't something that always existed as a country. As a people, yes, but as a country, no.
And I'm just saying that you can't, it was created by them. It was orchestrated by the Europeans.
Probably orchestrated, but they wouldn't have been able to
manipulate
do it without world powers behind them. Huh?
Yeah, it was manipulated. Let me change my wording. It was manipulated by the Rothschilds. They are Jews.
I don't know anything.
It'd be out of guilt when they themselves orchestrated that. That's what I'm saying.
I'm talking about us. I'm talking about as a country. I'm not talking about the Jews. I'm not talking about the Rothschilds. I'm talking about the countries that aided them in creating this nation.
And that's what I'm saying. It was them.
But they wouldn't have been able to do it alone. They don't have the power to do that. So
Who don't have the power?
It's just like the war. They're using our weapons right now in Palestine to basically commit genocide against Palestine. And they're using our weapons. The United States is the most powerful country in the world when it comes to military. So even in the 40s. What'd you say?
That's Israel. Israel, go back.
No, Israel is not. Israel is using our technology. Israel is using our weapons. And if we wanted to put an end to it, we could. It's like we took forever to put an end to what was happening in Rwanda, because if we call it a genocide, we have to intervene. That's why we won't call it a genocide, because then we have to do something about it. But my point is, they wouldn't have been able to create a country, to mark out a country and designate it their own, without European and American world powers to back them in doing it.
I agree with that.
That's what I'm saying.
Yes, that is correct. And as far as them using our weapons, I'm gonna send you some information. I'm gonna send you some information that I came in contact with who is actually creating all these different types of weapons, where it's coming from, and selling it worldwide, because the information that I've come across is not America, it's actually Israel. And so I'm going to send you that information to, it was an Arab article that I read talking about that. And they were in a political arena setting discussing this. And they were, I don't want to say some things that is going to go live. So maybe off camera, I would say what I read and send you that article so that you can take a look on it. And you can send me the information that you have also, so I can look at it and see, because I'm just saying from what I have read thus far, I'm getting different information.
Well, and I think that there has to be a distinction made between the government and the people. And so governments like the United States government, I think that we're just as guilty of genocide against Palestine as any other government that knows what's happening and just sits back and let it happen.
Absolutely.
And it's the government of Israel. The government of Israel isn't the people of Israel. Those are two different things. Our government, what we do on our border, how we treat people, how we put people in basically concentration camps here, that's our government. Millions of the citizens in this country do not agree with that. And so even when there's a difference between criticizing government actions and then making that the same as the people. So I don't have a problem with the people of Israel, but I 100% disagree with our government, and I 100% disagree with how the Israeli government and all the other governments, world powers around the world, are dealing with what's happening in Palestine. But anyway, that's a whole nother conversation.
It is. Okay, anybody else have any questions for Dr. Wren? Mayor, you look like you just on the edge. What's on your mind? Now it's your chance. I know you.
In the chat.
Okay.
Now, I see a comment in the chat that says, I saw a U.S. general say once that Russia and China are now the most dangerous military staff. Dangerous, you could actually add North Korea to that. Dangerous and most powerful are two different things. We have the largest military and we're the largest military power on the planet. It doesn't mean that we're going to use it, because we know that even if we did use it, it would basically be the destruction of the planet. Another world war wouldn't be good for anybody. One of the benefits of being in North America is the last world war that we had, or the last war that we had, was the Civil War. And we don't tend to have wars on our land. We fight in wars, but they don't tend to happen here, right? World War I, World War II. We fight in wars, even Vietnam, we tend to go other places, right? Cold War, we go other places. We don't have people bombing and doing all these things in the United States. But as far as industry, it's really because of industry that we surpassed every other country, and we're the largest military power. Now, dangerous, I would actually throw the US in that. I just don't think that we think of ourselves as dangerous because we're not communist. And so we think of any other kind of political country as more dangerous than us. But, when I leave this country and I go other places, nobody likes us.
I know,
They
absolutely.
tell a different narrative about the United States, and there's a reason for that. There's a reason why people feel the way they feel about Americans. And we need to pay attention, because if everybody is saying the same thing, there's something going on there, right? And so, yeah, but.
Now, according to that statement that I think Brother Randall put in there, America has nuclear capability as well. If you remember during the time where we were fighting during the Cold War with Russia, that's what kept them, as Dr. Wren was stating, from going to World War III, because they knew they had the capability to
we're not gonna
eradicate everybody on the face of the earth. Now it's coming up again. There's nothing new under the sun. Now we're dealing with the same thing with Israel. They're saying that with their capability, but they're questioning now with their leader. You all know who's the leader, probably will actually do it, because of the type of person he is. If they're in the position that they're losing, that they will probably do it. If we don't win, nobody wins. If we go down, all
nobody. And that's the thing. No one would win. No one's gonna win. It's the same thing. It's why we didn't go. We're not going to. Nobody's going to war with Russia over what's happening in Ukraine. It doesn't make sense. Russia is a nuclear power. China, we're not the only place in the world with weapons of mass destruction. We're not the only place in the world with the ability to destroy, islands and to create craters. And so it doesn't make sense. But also economically, we're all dependent on each other. And I think more than destruction, it's economics, because people are expendable, money isn't. And at the end of the day, this whole thing runs on money. The
Now,
whole thing runs
yeah,
on money.
yeah, right.
And so we're not
Absolutely.
going to fight, we're not going to fight people who we're in bed with when it comes to financially. We always, people say, well, China owns us. China doesn't own us, because China is dependent on us just as much as we're dependent on them. We're all in bed together financially. So it wouldn't be smart for anybody. So we try to go about doing things a different way, underhanded, but we're not trying to go to war. It wouldn't make sense. It wouldn't make sense for anybody. It would not be like World War II. No, it would be complete destruction for everybody, and it wouldn't benefit anybody.
And that's what they're saying that Israel is saying with, what is the name of that?
Samson.
I don't know if you heard of that.
Samson,
That's
something.
floating around. The Samson concept, I think is what it's called, where they say if they're in, you heard of that?
No.
Oh, okay. So I don't know how true it is, but that's neither here nor there, but it's out there. So it came from somewhere. And like I was saying earlier, it is the same concept of what we were dealing with during the Cold War that Israel is saying, because they're the hotbed. Israel is saying that if they're enroached by their enemy that comes in their territory and they're not able to destroy them or defeat them, Israel is saying that we're going to release. This is what this concept says.
Yeah,
We're going to release all of our weapons that we have and destroy everybody. If we can't win, it wins.
Yeah, I've never heard of anything. I think there's a lot of stuff out there. And I think that especially right now with what's happening with Palestinians, we have to filter a lot of things that are coming out and try to find the facts in it. I think if you just look at just numbers, I think numbers alone tell you pretty much everything you need to know. And not just numbers, but the reality that I was literally just in conversation. I take Krav Maga. So Krav Maga is Israeli martial arts. That's what we use in our military. That's what we use in many militaries around the world. And I was literally just sitting next to two individuals who were talking about going to Israel, and one of them just went in like March. And you don't have to know all the conspiracies. I'm actually not very interested in that. I'm more interested in the human rights violations that are very clear and evident. And one of them said, "Oh yeah, I was just in Israel, in March and blah 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 blah." And something that people don't think about is if you're actually at war and you are on edge and there's like a real threat, how do you still have tourism?
Mm-hmm.
How is tourism continuing? And I think so we don't have to dig deep. That's why I say you don't need the conspiracies. You don't need all that other stuff. Just look at just basics. People are still traveling and enjoying themselves as tourists in Israel. That's not happening in the parts of Israel where Palestinians live.
Mm-mm.
So, it's like, come on, this is not, these are not two powers that are on the same page. And,
No.
and Palestinians just in general have basically lived under a system of apartheid for forever, as long as Israel's pretty much been a country. They've been discriminated against. Because Palestinians have always been there, and so they've been discriminated against, and the relationship is a complicated relationship between them. But you don't have to go far. You can see how they don't really have real citizenship, how all the different ways that they've been discriminated against. You can look at the sheer numbers of people that have died that are of Palestinian descent and people that are Israel or Israeli. You don't have to do all this other stuff. It's a genocide. That's what it is. It is we're talking about crimes against humanity that the government of Israel is committing against Palestinian people within their borders. and outside of their borders. But that's this clear as day, and it's the same with what happened in Rwanda. You know, it was a genocide, but nobody would say it. But the moment, and this was under different presidents, so it's not even about Republican and Democrat. Bill Clinton was a Democrat. So we have Democratic presidents who are sitting back and allowing these genocides to happen. And we have world powers who sit back and allow this to happen. That's why I say we're all guilty. We're all guilty of what's happening to Palestinians as far as our governments are concerned. So, but yeah, it is what it is. It's genocide.
And I have heard of people that are still going visiting over there in Israel, so that's not news to me. Also,
Yeah, that tells you a lot. That tells you how much of a war that it's not two people with the same powers going to war with each other. It's not what's happening.
yeah, and also we need to bring up, because people don't speak about this also, with the indigenous people over in that area that are the highly melanated people, how that live in that area where the Palestinians are, how they have been discriminated against by the Palestinian. See, we talk about the Palestinian, and no, killing is not right. We're going to have to strike that out, because they get very particular about the words that you use on the social media. Yeah. So those people,
unaliving.
Yes, unaliving is the word that they're using now. And that's what I was going to say. Have to get used to changing my wording to try to stay abreast of this social media here. And they're talking about how they are being unalive, but we don't talk about how those people that's been unalive have done some detrimental things to people that are highly melanated either. So we need to tell the whole narrative of the whole story. And it's not that I'm condoning anybody being unalive. I'm just saying we need to look at the whole narrative of what's been going on in that particular area as well, because nobody ever comes up and step up to the plate. And I'm just going to be very matter of fact about this, about melanated people and what's happening to us. Like, everybody is talking about what's happening to the Palestinian. Well, nobody really is talking that much about what's happening in Congo and what has been happening in Congo. That is I don't want to put a measurement on lives that have been taken, but when you go and look at what's been going on in Congo, I'm just saying it is not getting the coverage that this Palestinian issue is getting. And so you have to ask yourself the question, why?
That's right, Brenda.
Raping, they're killing, they're stealing, and we know this in East Congo. The Eastern
Oh, yeah.
Congo.
Yes. For hundreds of years.
Go ahead.
Yes.
For hundreds of years.
And that's kind of a trend when it comes to issues. We see so there's a hierarchy. So you have Russia basically causing all these problems with Syria, right? Nobody really knows about it. Only it's being talked about maybe in
I know about that issue too.
And then nobody says anything, right? And then you have all these countries not allowing Syrian refugees. And then you have Russia basically starting a war with Ukraine. And then all of a sudden, the same countries who didn't have the room or the space for the Syrians have room for Ukrainians. What's the difference? Right? And so then you can keep going down the list. So it's a hierarchy. So you have and I think that it's great what they're doing with Ukrainians. I just feel like not just them, but us even. We've opened our borders. But why don't we open our borders to all people? Well, because we live in a racialized world. And so, well, they're still European. They're more like the people in power, right? But Syrians, they're different religion. They have a different culture. They speak, whatever. They have a different history. And then you keep going down, right? And so it's the same thing. We could say that every group, even us, that has been discriminated against, has discriminated against, marginalized, or committed some kind of crime against humanity, against someone else who we consider other. I mean, because the continent of Africa is made up of people with different histories, different languages, different cultures. Just because we share melanated skin don't mean we are the same people or consider ourselves the same people. And so when we think about wars, even with groups in Africa, what we're seeing in East Congo is a war with Africans. What we saw in Sudan, and now we have South Sudan, we have different nations. This is a war of melanated people. with issues that,
Instigated by Europeans for the simple purpose of extraditing
well,
minerals, resources.
many of them are, the most recent ones are you could trace them back to issues that Europeans started, right? Because you break up a country into these borders, but you don't consider who the people are, right? Has nothing to do with the people. It has everything to do with what you can take care, what you can occupy. And then you institute laws that separate people, all this other kind of stuff that happens. But let's go past the Europeans and let's go past this last wave of colonization in Africa. We were already going to war with other people in Africa because they weren't the same people. They were different people. You had African empires fighting war is old. People have been killing people for as long as we've been here.
That's
For
not my
territory
point, Dr. Wren. What I was
No,
saying.
well, I'm saying that we have marginalized.
They're not getting the coverage. Ukraine is getting much
No,
coverage.
we're not. We're not getting the coverage, and we're not getting the coverage because of the hierarchy. Because if you're European, you're going to get more coverage than if you are Middle Eastern, than if you are North African, and you keep going down. Then sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, there are many things happening in sub-Saharan Africa that no one talks about. But it's because they're further down the list of issues, and really when it comes to importance, our value, so especially sub-Saharan African, darker skinned people, sub-Saharan African people, and even people in, India, but these other populations are not as worthy of the coverage as some other groups.
So
But I just bring
so
that up because
you
you talk about what Palestinians have done to other people, but so have we. We've done the same thing. Does that mean that what's happening now is not as much of an issue? What it means is we have a human problem, and that human problem is destroying other people's lives. As people on this planet, we need to do better. Yeah, and I know that there are many other groups in Gaza, and there are many other minority groups in Israel that are never discussed and that are just as marginalized and discriminated against and have lost lives during this war that, like you said, are not being talked about.
Right. And I brought that up because, and I understand about the different wars and stuff. And we actually had a conversation about this with Mother Bantu on here. She's actually in Africa now and talked to one of the elders there about the wars in Africa, but we're not going to get on that. But the point of the matter is, yes, it has to do with color, but it's deeper than that as well. We know that without the resources in Africa, the West would not have the wealth that they have. We would not be able to be on this Zoom. So we know that they keep those areas destabilized. So it's more than color. It has to do with destabilizing those particular areas to take advantage of their resources is what I'm saying. And that's what I was hinting at. We know people that are in high level military that have told us this.
No, so, that's a fact. That's not even like up for debate. Right. That's exactly what we do to Africa and South America and Central America.
Right. And so you were talking about how they've been fighting over there one another. We've been told also how the U.S. go in there and instigate this from someone that worked in a high level position in the military that told us how they do it and what they do and how they send their own people that look like them from the military in those I forgot what was he in, that branch he was in. But anyway, it was one of those special groups that they were in, and how they go send the Black people in there that look like them to befriend them, and then they cause an internal conflict with the people on the ground. This was told to us by a hightail military.
That's how they used to use anthropologists. That's literally what we used to do for our government. We used to go into places to manipulate and find out information and report it back to our government. That's exactly how anthropologists were used. So that's nothing new. And this is why when you leave this country, don't nobody like us. Because they know.
I ain't got nothing to do with the U.S. government. If you,
I know, right? That's why I make the distinction between governments and people. Like our government, we're taking Haitian people in the middle of the night and dropping them right back off in Haiti and denying them their right to seek asylum. We're doing a whole bunch of stuff. Right. That's not stuff I agree with. So I like to always make the distinction between governments and people. Those are two different things. Mm-hmm. But what you just said, we have been doing that. We've been doing that all over the world. And literally, anthropologists were literally hired because we're good at building relationships, learning languages, understanding people. And that's what we were used for early on. We don't do that anymore, but we were used for corporations. Corporations would hire us to do this. I spend a huge part on ethics when we talk about the history of anthropology.
Mhm.
That's exactly what happened. And so when you go to other places and they tell you their story and their relationship with the US, and not just the US, but the West as well, it's exploitive. It is it is a relationship that is built on exploitation. And it destabilizes, just like you said, destabilizes South America, Central America, and Africa. That is why we have this move right now of Black and brown countries and people from those places to the north, because we've so destabilized their communities that many of them can't even survive in those spaces anymore. It's not because they hate where they're from or they just everybody want to come to the north. That's not what's happening here. It's that they can't even live there anymore because of the how volatile it is, because of the battles, the wars, because of the famine, because of how we destroyed traditional livelihoods, replaced it with monocropping and things that would cut down everything and destroy their environments and cause, desertification. We have done so much destruction, and people aren't coming here because they want to. People are coming here because of the destruction that we've caused.
Survival.
Have to.
It has to do with survival. Now I have a question. You brought up a comment and you stated that corporations utilize anthropologists.
They
What were,
did.
what were they utilizing them for? What was it that they were using to benefit their companies? I would like to know.
So, they would hire anthropologists to convince the locals that that certain methods, particularly agricultural methods, are
Mm-hmm.
better suited for the environment, will give them more money, things like that. And so, like, for instance, you have a community that lives off of farming, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so they take care of their entire family via farming. And then you have a company that wants to convince them to monocrop and to convince them that this is the new way and this is a better way to make money and that they'll be able to take care of their family even more.
Like
And so
Monsanto.
when I say monocrop, I mean growing like one crop, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so then you convince them to do that, and then their land is depleted because monocropping is not sustainable, right? And so their land is depleted, and when their land is depleted, the company leaves. And now the people are left with a land that is now depleted. They've cut down all the trees, they've done everything. They've kind of destroyed the land to where now
Yep.
they can't even go back to their traditional
Yep.
form
Right.
of agriculture to
Right.
support their family. And so anthropologists were used a lot of times in those situations to manipulate those situations, but also because and that really goes back to we were able to build a rapport. Many times we already knew the language, and they trusted us. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's like in the past that we're not used that way anymore.
But
But
they're still
but
doing
now
that
we're
though.
actually now what'd you say?
But they're still doing that. Monsanto,
Oh
for
yeah, yeah. Well,
who's
now
doing
we're
that right now
actually
over in Nigeria.
oh, it hasn't
So much
stopped. But
information.
now, companies hire anthropologists or the government hires anthropologists to come up with solutions. Um, that's usually what we're used. We're problem solvers because our field is interdisciplinary. We overlap with all the sciences, we overlap with all the social sciences, and we understand that there are complex problems and complex solutions are required for them. You can't just have one thing. I do see, I haven't had any problems overseas as a Black American. They actually feel bad for me. I know, listen, being Black and being American is different than being white and being American. I literally was just telling someone else when I worked in Belize, my Blackness benefited me there. But if I was with a white colleague, then they would try to raise prices on like the taxi and stuff like that. Um, but um being an American, people, but being Black, we can still claim marginalization because that's true. That's still what's happening here. We can relate to other people in other countries based on a common oppression, even though we're American, right? So that oppression is going to cross borders and boundaries, and that's going to create, unfortunately, a community. Well, fortunately and unfortunately, a community and a relationship there that many other people who are American, particularly European Americans,
Mm-hmm.
have a difficult time doing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Even if they're poor European Americans, and so they're just as marginalized, right? But because of their skin color, they're going to have a difficult time. Let's see. Can
So it's
Dr. Wren
another question
answer
they
the
want you to
question
answer,
about
Dr. Wren, or to elaborate on. Someone said, I've seen DNA results of a lady whose DNA was 100% European without zero African DNA.
who? What? Who? Are you asking me? Is this possible?
I don't know what.
What's the question?
Nitra, did you ask that question?
It's Nitra.
Nitra?
Yeah, I was just saying that I've seen the results of this white lady once, and she was 100% European with no African DNA. And I was
So,
like, how is that possible if everyone is from Africa?
oh, okay. So, so yes, everybody's the origin of Homo sapiens is Africa. But when people are assessing DNA, they are assessing, well, it's complicated. So you can look at multiple variables. You can look at multiple traits within, DNA. We're looking at like a combination of things. And you say, well, when we see this combination, that combination doesn't mean that combination is more common among this group of people. That's really what you're saying. This combination of traits genetically is more common among this group of people because we've tested that population and this is what their pattern looks like. And then you go somewhere else and you say, well, this is more common among this group. That's what they're looking at. That doesn't have anything to do with whether or not she, has African ancestry. All people have African ancestry because Homo sapiens evolved in Africa. What they're looking at is that particular population's pattern shows that she hasn't had any admixture from any African population's pattern. That's all that's saying. So that's not actually assessing what you're looking at, which is origin, like human origin. So there's human origin. There's only one race of people. There's only one species. We are all Homo sapiens sapiens. When Neanderthals were around, we had another subspecies because they would have been Homo sapien neanderthalensis. And then we also had the Denisovans and then Homo erectus, who was still here until about 100,000 years ago. Those are two different areas. So they're just saying her particular pattern is European and it's all European. There hasn't been any recent admixture from Africa. That's what they're saying. Does that make sense?
But somewhere along the line, shouldn't they be able to detect some African
okay. So let me start it this way. So on the continent of Africa, because Africa is where Homo sapiens originated, you have more variation on the continent of Africa than you have outside of the continent of Africa. So if you take every other continent, you combine all the variation that you see, Africa has that and more because
Right.
Africa is where people originated. That's not what they're looking at though. So when we say things like straight hair, well, straight hair is an African trait. It's just more, but it's more common in, whatever group. And that's because when people were moving out of Africa, it's pockets of people that go places and they only take a portion of that genetic data with them. It's like if you have a group of 100 people and they make up we're just going to say 1,000 people, they make up a population and 100 leave. They're not going to take all of the genetic variation with them. They're only going to take whatever those 100 people have. And then they begin a community. That community is going to look like it's going to have its own particular pattern based on what they took with them. It doesn't mean that they weren't at one point a part of a larger group. It just means that their pattern is going to evolve to where it's very unique to that founder population, if that makes sense. And it's going to have a lot of things missing because it was only 100 people that left and not the whole group. Does that make sense? So we end up with a new pattern over here that the original group still has. They still have those traits, but their pattern is different because they have 900 people. They have more variation. This smaller group has less variation than the larger group, and they have a special pattern that's unique to them. That's what all of these populations are outside of Africa. That's exactly what they are. They're all founder populations that have only taken a small portion of the genetic material from Africa with them to these different parts of the world. And what that ends up looking like is a special pattern, not unique stuff happening particularly, but a special pattern that's unique to that part of the world. So this woman who only has European ancestry, they're saying that her pattern is pretty much her founder population's pattern, if that makes sense. Not that she's not related to the original part. That there's we've already when people are looking at ancestry today, they're not looking at trying to see if they have if they can trace their ancestry to Africa. We've already answered that question. So those ancestry tests are not doing that for you. We already know that we all descended from Africa. What they're doing for you is assessing how recent has there been any admixture between groups. Like so do you have any recent African ancestry? We already know that we all came from Africa. That question is answered. That question is not even being explored. We already know that. So now they're just looking at these founder populations and saying, who's mixed in with each other? Do we see, so like as far as African Americans, because we are an African diaspora group, we're very interested in this, right? We want to know where we came from. So when they're assessing our DNA, they're looking at recent genetic, material, recent additions. And so
How recent are we talking about, Dr. Wren?
we're not talking about 300,000 years ago, right? We're talking about something that, within the last several, even maybe millennia, but usually, hundreds of years. But because we already know we all come from Africa. So that's not what we're looking at. So the several centuries, right? That's what we're looking at here. Several centuries, but we can go back millennia, actually. We usually go back millennia when we're trying to assess like for indigenous people who occupy the United States today, when we're looking at their ancestry, we have to go back millennia. You can go back millennia, but so it's just when I say recent, I'm talking about not 300,000 years ago when Homo sapiens evolved. I'm talking about recent stuff, recent movements of people. But those tests are complicated because, like I said, with archaeology, we only know what we find. With those tests, we only know what we can only base those tests on our sample size. So if your sample doesn't include certain groups of people, then of course they're not going to find that in you. But as we continue to expand the foundational sample, right, upon which to test people's ancestry, then those tests are going to change over years. So it's always good to get that test redone as the sample population, the sample size expands and grows, and they get more samples from different parts of the world and from unique populations. Because even especially African diaspora people, they were targeting certain groups of Africans because of their skills.
One particular time, but not initially they weren't. They were just getting anybody initially, and then they became specific.
Yes. And when they did become specific, those populations are gonna be not overrepresented, but we're gonna see them more. They're gonna be more common in African diaspora groups when they realized that they needed to target certain groups and that would be best for business, basically. But if we don't have a sample, like if we lump like West Africa together, that's not going to give us a really good picture of our ancestry. So what many organizations have been doing is separating the different groups and getting, figuring out the pattern for this particular tribe or this particular group or this, so that when you run that ancestry test, they can give you more specifics and you can go all the way back to like clan or tribe or something like that. But as far as African, they're not looking for that because it's all African.
So who are Neanderthals, Dr. Wren? What are they? Yeah, because it's like they kind of hide some certain information about that or do not allow certain information about the origin or where they come from or who they really are, because we know they said that even us over in America have such small fraction within us from the admixture of Europeans that they can't even detect it in us. And definitely not in Africans, but it is in the European people. So who are the...
Are you talking about Neanderthal? You're talking about Neanderthal DNA? Oh, okay. So Neanderthal, so Homo heidelbergensis was a genus species that evolved in Africa. Homo heidelbergensis evolved into Homo sapiens, us, what we are today, in Africa, but Homo heidelbergensis left Africa, went into Europe, and evolved into Neanderthals in Europe. So I know. So you have Homo heidelbergensis originating in Africa. Some members of Homo heidelbergensis leave Africa, they go to Europe, and they evolve into Neanderthals. Then the Homo heidelbergensis that's left in Africa evolve into Homo sapiens, us.
Should we
Homo
be seeing
sapiens.
some of that DNA in there though?
Well, that's what I'm going to get to. So we
Okay.
have Homo sapiens sapiens. That's us. And Homo is genus, sapien is species. Sapiens, when I say it the second time, is subspecies. In Europe, you have Homo heidelbergensis evolving into Homo sapien neanderthalensis. Some people would say Homo neanderthalensis, but we now know because of genetic data that they are Homo sapiens because we interbred with them. And you only species can interbreed and produce viable offspring that can also have children. So Homo sapien neanderthalensis is what happens in Europe. So because these groups of Homo are moving, they're not stuck to Africa, they're not stuck to Europe, they're moving back and forth. There is genetic exchange between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. We know that because we find it in our DNA. So what the data shows is that Europeans have the largest amount of Neanderthal, the largest percentage of Neanderthal DNA. It's not large, but it is the largest percentage of Neanderthal DNA. I want to say up to
They keep changing it. They keep
yeah, they keep
changing
well,
it.
they have to because even with genetics, you only know what you find, right? And so we've mapped Neanderthal genome, we've mapped our genome, we've also mapped Denisovan genome. And Denisovans are split off of the Neanderthal branch. And Denisovans are who you're going to see all throughout Asia, and the islands in Polynesia and that area. But north, south, all throughout Asia, you have different groups of Denisovans. So there was a discovery made, I can't remember what year, but it was in the 2000s, and it was in Denisova Cave in Croatia. And it was the discovery of like finger bone. I think there might have been a tooth, maybe a foot bone. I can't remember, but it was just little fragments in a cave. And scientists were able to extract DNA from that. And since they already had Neanderthals genome map, their whole genome, and then they had our genome map, what they discovered with this DNA is that this particular individual had ancestry from Neanderthals, from us, Homo sapiens sapiens, from they called it a new genome, Denisovans, because this is before they had any more evidence on them. But they were able to map the genome of Denisovans before they found any real skeletal specimens of Denisovans, because this individual had that other genetic material. And then a fourth lineage. Many would say that that's probably Homo erectus because we know Homo erectus was still around. Well, because Homo erectus was still around at least 100,000 years ago, some of us, so anyway, so some of us would argue that that fourth lineage is Homo erectus. Because of this find, that's when we had to completely revamp the narrative, because we used to think Neanderthals were their own whatever, but now we know Neanderthals were Homo sapiens, but they were different subspecies of Homo sapiens. So they were Homo sapien neanderthalensis. And we know that because we interbred with them, because we have an individual who has Neanderthal DNA, Homo sapien DNA, Denisovan, and a fourth lineage. They would not have it if there was no interbreeding. So, now and that made us start to test what populations have, Neanderthal DNA and how much do they have. In that same discussion, you can't not include Denisovans because that's included in the discussion. But Europeans have more Neanderthal DNA. Northern Africans have Neanderthal DNA less than Europeans. Asians have a lot of Denisovan DNA, which is a branch off of Neanderthals. And sub-Saharan Africans have the smallest percentage of Neanderthal DNA. So we know that genetic exchange was way less. What it doesn't mean is that they have zero, but what it does mean is that they have the smallest to zero, right? So some people literally do only have zero Neanderthal, but then there are some sub-Saharan Africans that have some Neanderthal. Now, as African diaspora populations, we're going to have more Neanderthal DNA than sub-Saharan Africans that maybe never left Africa even if they didn't leave, there's still colonization that happened and there's exchange there with Europeans. But we would have gotten it, African diaspora populations would have gotten it mostly from European ancestry, right? So that's how we would have acquired Neanderthal DNA. And that's how we most likely acquired Neanderthal DNA because the percentage is so small to almost non-existent in sub-Saharan African populations. But that was a recent find. And that's why Neanderthals got a new name. They're no longer we still say Homo neanderthalensis, but we know that it's Homo sapien neanderthalensis because we bred with them. They are Homo sapiens. But today, there are no subspecies of Homo sapiens. We are the only subspecies. There's only Homo sapiens sapiens. All people on the face of the planet are Homo sapiens sapiens. Neanderthals did not go extinct. They interbred. Their genetic material is still here, but as a group, as a separate group that we could point to and say this is their own special group, they no longer exist in that way. Did I answer your question? So it's a genetic question. So, and biological anthropology is the biology of one species, Homo sapiens, and all of our ancestors. So, it's biology, but it's just one species and hominin ancestors. So we do genetics, all this different stuff, but we have specialty. But yeah, so it's possible. It's possible not to have Neanderthal DNA for sure. Yeah.
Mama Diana?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I have a comment and a question, because listening to all of this and thinking that in 2024, we're still talking about identity as African people, African descended people. And I'm thinking, though, why are we going all deep down subterranean and underwater archaeology, anthropology, if indeed we're all from Africa? Humanity began in Africa. Then in 2024, even though I'm proud of my African DNA, I do have European DNA, and I do have native DNA. But coming back to the continent, why then are we going to fight and war against the European colonizers coming in? Because if they are Africans from the beginning, they have a right to the land.
Well, I mean, a right to land is a cultural question, because
that's what I'm going to. Culture.
Yeah, that's a cultural question. I mean, so it's complicated on several levels. So when you say right to land, you're talking about continent of Africa?
Yes.
Okay, because I was like, what land? Which
No,
land?
I'm sorry. I meant the continent.
Okay.
I meant the continent of Africa. Yes.
You make a good point, because yeah, I can't answer that question, but you make a great point. It's really kind of like you leave and you come back. But it's not so much about leaving and come back. We have to talk about the cultural aspect of how they came back, right? Of how groups came back. And it's nothing new. Like I said, colonization is not new. Europeans are not the only people to colonize. Asian, African people have colonized different parts of the world,
But there's a distinction in the colonization of Europeans that we need to make. They're the only
what you just said. That's what she just said.
Yeah, with what they have done and how they have done it.
Oh no, that's actually not true. Because so when we talk about colonization, you have African empires that colonized other parts of Africa and completely tried to eradicate religions that were in that space. And well, we would call them sacred lifeways, not necessarily religions. But this is old. Colonization is old. The last wave is the European colonization. That's why we feel it as much. And because we are
colonization itself, I'm talking about what they did when they went and colonized, the methods I'm talking about.
So if you're talking about forcing people to assimilate, wiping out populations, eradicating cultures, they're not the only ones to do it. That's my point. That the colonization, whether it's European or if we go further back in time, it almost always looked that way. There were very few
examples of some of the African kingdoms that did that and what they did and how they did it. Educate us on that, man.
Okay, I can give you a more current example. Actually,
I want one. I don't want one current, because theirs is not current. I want to go back. Let's do it.
Colonization is current. Colonization continues.
I understand that, but I'm talking about the time frame when they went in the 1500s, 16, 17, 1800s. So let's go on back further. Further back. What I'm saying, to do a correct and an accurate and a fair comparison is what I'm saying.
Okay. So one that's actually pretty good would be, I'm sure you all have seen The Woman King, right? And people didn't really, they had some issues with The Woman King because the movie portrayed Africans selling Africans. Different communities, basically taking over other African tribes and really empires, and then selling them into slavery. Before Europeans came, they were already doing this. They were already enslaving these people. They were already selling them to other African countries. The arrival of Europeans was new. That was just a new group to do the same thing. And so that's like it's recent because they made a movie out of it, but it's also what was happening. It's not new. It's when I talk to my friends that are, most of them are Nigerian. Just because they're Nigerian doesn't mean that they're all the same. There are different groups in Nigeria.
Right,
And
I'm
so
aware of
when
that.
we assess that history, or another example would be Nubia.
Okay,
So
so
Nubian
let's go
Nubian
back to
people.
the Woman King. You know,
Mhm.
I'm not talking about the movies because they add things in there. And
No. But the movie was accurate when the movie dealt with this kingdom fighting other African kingdoms. They have been doing that for centuries. They
right,
have been
did
fighting with each
they
other,
do?
enslaving each other, selling each other to other African nations. That's old. That was old. That was before European contact.
Okay, well, with all due respect,
Mhm.
because we don't have Africans represented on here to speak to that, we're African Americans, but I will speak for the ones that have told me that part of their history. And what I have been told by several people, one of them was from royalty, that the slavery that the Europeans had, which they invented chattel slavery, was not what they had on the continent of Africa. And it wasn't even referred to that. It was actually service. And they had the opportunity to integrate into the family, and they were treated with dignity and respect, not like what the Europeans did. So that's why I was asking for you to give me some examples to educate us, because that's not the narrative that we're now, since we're connected on the continent, trying to get the narrative. Okay, what happened to our ancestors over there? What? Because we've lost our culture and our history. So we want to know and try to connect the puzzles and the pieces together. And we're getting a different narrative than what we have been taught over here in the West from our family on the continent, that what they're considering slavery and saying, oh, they did this in Africa, it is not the same. They're twisting up and making it look as if it's the same. And they're saying it's not the same. Yes, it did happen where they did take people, and it was for certain reasons why they did that too. Like if somebody did something in the community that was against their culture, that belief that was just very detrimental, they banned them. And a lot of times those people are either they may have been taken into slavery from that or whatever, and from neighboring kingdoms, that is correct, but they incorporated them into their family. And after 7 years, as stated in the Bible, they had an opportunity to be released or they could stay. And some of them stayed and they were able to learn a trade. So it did not happen the way that we had been taught, in the way that the Europeans did to us when they came up with the chattel slavery.
Okay, so I'm gonna have to agree and disagree, only because what you're saying is specific to particular parts of Africa. Africa is a continent. Even
Right.
with European slavery, all European slavery didn't look the same. Spanish Florida looked different than the rest of the continent before Florida was a part of the US.
That's
And
why I
so
said let's
Spanish
go with like the
Florida
15, 16, 17, 1800s and look at
but
a
even
comparison.
here with Europeans in Spanish Florida, they didn't enslave people as harsh as they did, as harsh as the British
British.
did, right? And so we could say the same thing about Europeans, that slavery would have been different all around the world, depending on if you were Portuguese in certain parts of Africa, Portuguese in, the Caribbean, Spanish, blah, blah, blah. We could argue the exact same thing. So one person from Africa can't speak for the whole continent of
I'm not
Africa.
saying
But you
one. I
bring
didn't
up a
say
good
one.
point. No, but you bring up a good point, and that is variation. So the point is that you're going to have things that look very much like and I wouldn't even say worse, because I don't think it can get any worse, but very much like what Europeans did. You're going to have people in Africa completely wiping out other groups.
What
You're going to have
group
people.
in
You're
Africa
going to have
did
people
that?
in Africa. You're going to have people in Africa assimilating, forcibly assimilating, where they can come into the community and they can become a part of the community. But it's kind of like, if you don't, you're not really going to have a good life if you don't do that. You're going to have service, like what you said, what we would call more like indentured servitude. That's what Europeans would call it. You're going to have all these different types of colonization. There's still colonization. You're going to have that on the African continent, and you're going to have that with the way Europeans colonize as well. You're going to have, there's going to be variation. So the things that we don't like to talk about, like especially in the States, we don't want to hear people say, well, it wasn't that bad. But in East Tennessee, for instance, if you were a slave, you could get married. You could have a family. You went to school in East Tennessee. That's why whenever the Civil War happened, the East Tennessee was called divided loyalties because they fought with the Union. But the rest of Tennessee, Chattanooga all the way to Memphis, fought with the Confederate Army. So even in the states, slavery looked different. Our first Black millionaire was from East Tennessee, Caledonia Johnson. And it's because he was taught to read, write, and race horses. And he was the first Black millionaire. They didn't even have segregated schools until 1901 because somebody got mad that Black people went to school with white people. That's a history we don't know here. So what you're saying is valid, but it also just speaks to how complex colonization in itself is with any group of people. So
that's why I said, who are the groups of people in Africa that did atrocities like the Europeans? What I'm asking, I said, educate us. So we know the groups of the Europeans saying Africans did the same thing as they did with their colonization in the 14, 15, 16, 17, 1800s. So during that time frame or just period, who are they? Who are the groups of people on the continent of Africa?
Nubia today, Nubians are 100% Muslim. Nubians used to be 100% Christian until they were forced, because there was a wave that went through Africa where we see Islam kind of being pushed all the way from east to west part of like the middle part of the continent. And during that process, you could decide to maintain whatever you believe, and if you did, you would be enslaved. And it wasn't just you would be enslaved, but it was you would be enslaved, and that slavery wasn't the kind slavery. It wasn't like a servant slavery. It was labor, like basically harsh labor, rape, all kinds of things.
So now we're talking about the Arabics, because they were the ones, the Muslims that did that. That's sweet. You had the Arabics, the Muslims that came to the east, and then you had the Europeans in the west.
Mm-hmm. But that move that continued east wasn't just the Arabs. Once those countries were colonized and became Muslim, many of those Muslim nations, basically got on board with that move and those nations then used their power and their might to do the same thing as they moved west, doing the same thing, pushing the same narrative. And then later, became amazing countries, with universities and all this. But we were doing it. We were doing the same. I mean, we were literally doing the same thing. It's like when Europeans came here and committed genocide against indigenous people, did all this stuff. Guess what? Many indigenous tribes did. They ended up owning slaves.
Mm-hmm.
They ended up having their own slaves. They ended up doing the same things the Europeans were doing. Same thing happened in other parts of the world. And so you have people who are Black, who were Cherokee descendants of Cherokee slaves that are fighting to be Cherokee, recognized as Cherokee today.
I know.
The same stuff happened. So even though the Arabs might have been the first ones to bring it in, they weren't the only ones that pushed it west. And they weren't the only ones that used the same tactics that were used against them centuries before to continue to push that. And that's my point. I think, but then I'm speaking also from a human rights perspective. And that is that there's not one group of people who is more violent than another group of people. People have invented ways to be violent. I know.
I'm gonna send some information because you'll appreciate it, because it's coming from a scientific perspective, because it's based
I'm
upon.
I'm not even coming from a scientific perspective. I'm coming from a cultural perspective, because there's no violent gene. It's something that you learn in your culture.
I'm not talking about a gene.
And so no, I know. So I'm talking about humans in general. Humans, unfortunately, have created so many ways to be cruel to the other, whatever that other looks like. So it's, in anthropology, we have a term called cultural relativism. And we say that term because it means that you don't assume that your culture is better than somebody else's, that your ways are better than somebody else's. But we also have, we also take positions. We have to take positions because for many of us, there are certain things that people do that we're like, that's not okay.
We can't hear you. We don't know if you can hear us, but you froze up.
Goes.
Yeah. She totally froze this time. Okay. This is a difficult conversation, but one that needs to be had. We were talking about the Muslim, and still my question, she's dropped off now. Still, my question have not been answered. I'm aware of the Arabics coming in and colonizing and forcing people. I've researched that to become particularly. She is, yeah.
Okay. I was about to text Miss Diana and say, I'm coming back. So yeah, I'm just coming from a human perspective because because of one of my areas that I'm really focused on is human rights. When I look at people all around the world, so for instance, female genital cutting, there are people in that argument who have had it done and who consider it a rite of passage and a beautiful thing, and that's why we don't use the term mutilation. And that's removing the clitoris and sometimes the inner lips. It's different stages. But then there are also people in that community who consider it a violation. And these communities are in Asia, these communities are in the Middle East, and they are in Africa. And, from my perspective, it's a violation. But I also have to respect the person who says that it's a rite of passage, right? And so I would, on a personal level, I consider it cruel. I consider it something to, but I don't come from that community, right? So I consider it cruel, and I consider it something to thwart sexual desire in females. I consider it something that's done in a male-dominated society to, so that's how I'm looking at this practice. I consider that cruel because many times it's not even done at a hospital. It's done by women with, sharpened tools. They hold you down. You don't get any pain medicine, whether it's in Asia, the Middle East, or Africa. When I'm looking at people all around the world, I'm looking at this. I'm looking at how you have communities that go into communities, rape all the women. They leave them alive, though, but they know that if they rape all the women, that they can't go back home and they have to commit suicide, right? Or they can't say anything at all because then their husband won't stay with them. So they can never even deal with the trauma that they've gone through, whether that's in Africa, Asia. There are a lot of practices around the world, to me, that are just as violent. So I don't look at any one group. I'm like, I don't know. People are violent. People can be. They not are, but they can be. Communities, cultures. There's violence on a spectrum all around the world that's why I say we've come up with so many ways to be violent to each other. And I'm not speaking for one people. I'm speaking for people in general. Some customs are violent. So that's the perspective that I'm coming from, is a perspective of all of these different things that, it's like, I don't know, that's a lot. Now, today, when we talk about colonization, when we talk about that's the colonization that really impacts us today. That's the colonization, almost the one that matters the most right now, because it's the one that is influencing relationships between communities, cultures. It's the one that influences what narratives are being told, what narratives aren't being told. It's that European colonization. The further back we go in time, it has very little impact, at least on us here in the States as African diaspora communities. It probably would have more impact if you were like in Africa. I know that there are two groups. It was two Nigerian groups. I can't even remember their names. I'm gonna look it up again. But they were there's a term that they don't mention.
You have what? What was that you said? They have what?
It was a group of people they didn't mention because they used to call them this term, and I was just looking at it like 2 weeks ago. They would call them this name, and it basically, there was a history where that particular group was marginalized. So it was basically a hierarchy, and that particular group was marginalized and all these different things. And now they don't use the word, it's taboo. And, they passed laws so that they couldn't continue to marginalize that group of people. But when we think about that, even when we look at like Ethiopian customs and Ethiopian origin stories, like the Kamant, their story was God created people out of clay. And if he had one batch, he didn't burn long enough, they're white. Or European or white, however you want to call it. Then he had another batch, he burned too much, and they're like darker skinned Africans. And then he has the batch that he cooked just perfect, and they're the Ethiopians. their group, because Ethiopians are, varied, right? And so that would be their group. Everybody's origin story is specific to their population, and everybody else is other and not perfect, not the chosen, not the, that's just what we do. And then we tend to treat the other violently, unfortunately, period. So, but anyway.
So what I was saying was there's this article out. Actually, it's a book that I had started reading and I haven't finished reading it. And it's coming from a scientific perspective of the right hemisphere. And it is stating in this particular book how, based upon the right controlling certain behaviors and the left controlling certain behavior, and they're using it to show a distinction on the behaviors of white versus black is what the book is discussing. So, like I said, I haven't finished the book, but there is a difference, and there is a group of people that have a tendency towards violence more because they tend to operate more out of that left hemisphere of the brain, is what that book was saying. And this is it's coming from that perspective.
So as far as genetics is concerned, there's no gene for violence, but we use a term in anthropology called enculturation. And enculturation is basically how you're raised. So if you are raised in a community where there's a lot more violence, say, for instance, if you steal, you get your hand chopped off, not necessarily, you don't pay a fine, you don't go to prison, prison itself is violent though, too. Then I operating out of the left or the right side of the brain, I would like to know who this person is, because
I'll send you the book.
Are they a educator somewhere?
I can't remember the author offhand because it's been a while since I started reading the book and I haven't completed the book. So I'll go back and find it and I'll send it to Mama Diana so that she can send it to you so that you can look at it.
Yeah, because this is a big discussion in anthropology, because back in the day, right, the argument was that we were the violent ones, that we were the primitive ones, we were the savages, all the Black and brown people were primitive and savages and violence, and we would
they still say that,
kill, right? And that used to be the narrative. And then once we debunked that narrative by using genetics and also culture, there's nothing about our genes that makes people more violent. Violence is learned behavior. Culture is learned behavior. And you have to be raised in an environment where violence is taught. If violence is not taught, it's not a default for you. If it's taught or if it's expected in certain circumstances, then it is. But as far as one side of the brain being more violent behavior than the other, now with the brain is complicated. This isn't dealing with genetics, though. It's dealing with
right. I never said genetics.
Yeah. Well, we know that people that have trauma to certain parts of their brain,
these are not people that have a traumatic.
They can be more agitated. They can be more aggressive.
Yes,
they can.
That's because of.
Yeah. But as far as
it's not what that book is discussing, though, about TBI. It's not discussing people that have TBI.
Yeah. Well, that's the only instances that I know. I have not heard from any scientists, neurosurgeons, or other. That's why I would like to know who's the author, because there's a lot of people writing stuff out here that are not experts in their field.
Well, just experts don't mean it's right either. Now we've learned that too.
Well, but the point, when I say experts in their field, we have something called peer review. And so as an individual, I can't sit here and say that I'm the expert and know all about everything. But what I can say is when I publish something, or when I speak, or when I'm saying something, I'm speaking from a space where we have peer review, meaning that one individual can't just say what they want to say. It's a checks and balance system in academia. We have people who are also experts who have gone through the process of getting a terminal degree in the field, who will check what I say, and someone else will check, and then this person will check, because there was a time where we didn't have that, where people could just say what they wanted to say and people would just follow suit. We don't have that anymore. We have a checks and balance system in the field, and people who don't submit to that checks and balance system are not considered credible sources. You have to submit to the system, because when you do not, you end up with stuff that makes zero sense, is not based on any real data or real evidence, because you can't just find something once and say this is what it is. It has to be tested over and over and over and over. We have a process that we go through. This is in the sciences. We have a process that we go through when we're trying to say that something is, that there's a high chance that there's a relationship between something. It can't be a one-off. It has to be tested, rigorous testing, multiple scientists over a period of time. That's how that works. That's why I want to know, who is this person? Do they have a terminal degree, and has this source been peer reviewed? Because if it hasn't, then it's of no value to me, other than anybody can write a book. If it's university press, it's been peer reviewed, because all university press stuff is peer reviewed. And that means by a panel of experts, and not just the panel, but things that go through peer review, they go out, you want to publish them, they go out to your peers. Everybody gets to look at it. Everybody gets to comment on it. Everybody gets to say, wait a minute, you need to do this. This don't make sense. Your stats are off. How many sources did you? That's the process that we go through. So, and that's to avoid people saying that they're an expert and that they know all be all when it comes to stuff. So that's why, like, I'm always telling my students, who wrote it? Where does it come from? Is it peer review? It's extremely important. But I have never heard ever, that one side of the brain makes people more violent than the other side of the brain. I've never heard that.
They have a tendency, they said, but
I've never heard that.
That was my first time hearing of it too. But we're going to end it here. But I'd like to say also that we have to be careful with that peer review, because I have documentation where there was some peer reviewed information out during a particular time that I can't say on COVID. It was peer reviewed, and it was a doctor that was sharing this in the webinar that I was in, and they had it in a peer reviewed magazine, and they were asked to take it down. And I have proof of it when I was in the webinar. So we have to even be careful with that, because we know that there is some political agenda out there, something even in the science.
Of course, science is done in the questions we ask or don't ask are very much political and cultural. So who asked them to take it down? Was it the scientists that asked them to take it down?
Mm-hmm.
Who asked them to take it down?
I'll tell you when we get off.
Okay, so the other group that I wanted to talk about was really quickly, because you asked about another group. I always say their name wrong. That's why I had to look it up. Oromo in Ethiopia.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there are marginalized. Actually, there are many marginalized groups in Ethiopia. And you have groups in Ethiopia is the only country that wasn't colonized. I'm part Ethiopian, so we're very proud of this history. But anyway, so this particular group of people has been marginalized for centuries. They have been marginalized. Again, they weren't colonized. It's not that they fought Italy, we won. But anyway, so here we have an African nation that is marginalizing, a whole population. They're basically on the outskirts. They get, the least amount of resources. There's money that's being funneled into Ethiopia, but it's not going toward aiding these groups of people. So we would consider this, well, actually, it wouldn't be colonization. Well, it wouldn't be colonization, because they didn't take over anything. It's just a hierarchy in that country where they're marginalizing other African people, to the point where these people are experiencing what we call a slow genocide. On a global scale, we call what's happening to them a slow genocide. A slow genocide is the same thing that we do to people on our border. And it's also a good example of that would be what we're doing in Pine Ridge, which is the poorest reservation here in the United States, to the Lakota Sioux. And it's basically where you create circumstances to where people, their basic needs are met. So they have higher rates of disease. They have higher rates of infant mortality. They have higher mortality rates in general. They even have diseases that might have been eradicated in the rest of the population. So like on Pine Ridge, people are still dying of tuberculosis, which is very uncommon. And at high rates, they have the highest infant mortality rate on the continent. This is right here in the US on one of our reservations. And so we call this a slow genocide. That's happening to the Oromo in Ethiopia. That's happening to the Lakota Sioux here. It happens on our borders. And, of course, in Ethiopia, it's Africans doing it to other Africans. But that's really not the point. My point is human beings can be violent. Human cultures can be violent against other people. But don't know anything about I would like to know about the article. because
I'll send you that the article where they had reject on it.
Mhm.
I don't want to speak too much on it on camera.
Yeah, well, it just makes me, if scientists ask them to take it down, then it is peer reviewed. They're like, wait, you have to get that off of there. That's not okay. But yeah, sometimes information gets out. There are people in my field who still believe, they believe, but they can't back it up because, they don't have any data to support it. Who still believe in some aspects of eugenics. But that's a whole nother, but they don't have anything to support it. They're pulling at straws because they have their own cultural ideas about people. They're racist, basically. So, but okay.
All right.
Definitely enjoyed this back and forth. This
It was a great
banter back
learning
and forth.
experience.
Yeah.
All right.
And then I have some things I need to look at now. I do want to know about that book. And then there was something else you said.
Let me write that down before I forget it, that I need to send you. There was something else earlier we mentioned, and I said
you were talking about the Rothschilds.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know anything about that. What else was there? I can't remember. Oh, well, so yeah, I'm definitely interested in this book because I'm like, what in the world? Yeah, no, we have literally
very interesting to me. So I said I had to finish reading it. I just started reading. I don't know how, it wasn't a lot of pages that I said, this is very interesting.
Yeah. So I would, but the what peer review should look like is if they were scientists who asked, that's because of peer review. Some things might get through the, whatever, and then it's like, no, we need to make a statement that it's wrong, that it's not correct. So like we have in our societies that we're a part of, we have statements that we'll make on different things. Like we have a statement on race, and we go through the history of racialization and how Black people aren't inferior when it comes to health. Black people are marginalized, so they don't have access to the same healthcare that other groups have. Healthcare have access to.
That is that slow genocide that you talked about.
Huh?
And that is part of that slow genocide that you talked about.
Exactly. Yes. So when we think of a slow genocide, yeah. In extreme cases in the States, though, Pine Ridge, and then in Ethiopia, the Oromo, and other minority groups as well. But okay. I certainly appreciated this. I have a party I don't want to go to at 3, so
I'll cut that out on the live.
Oh, sorry. Oh, I don't really care. I'm just when family invites you to things, it's like my nephew called me and said, "Do I have to go to this? Are you gonna make us go to this?" And I was like, "I'm not gonna come get you. So yeah, you're gonna have to go." He's like, "Can I hide in the room?" And I'm like, I really don't care because I might be right there with you. So we'll see. We'll see. I'm just being nice, showing up. But I definitely appreciate it. And then I also wanted to know where there was another person on here. I don't know if she's on here anymore.
Oh, Nidra, the question about the European descent being 100%.
Oh, no, not that one. The question of where they found information about people moving things 1,000,000 years ago. Like where'd that come from?
Bantu.
Yeah, those Bantu.
And what was that question again, Dr. Wren, so that what?
She mentioned Africans circumnavigating the globe and trading 1,000,000 years ago. And we don't have any evidence for that, but I would like to know where that.
I don't think that's what she was saying. Her point was that we have been around, and there's oral tradition stating that we Africans, melanated people, have been around for so many years. And you touched on that, and she agreed with you because you agreed with her what she was saying as well.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. No, we've definitely been. We were the first to be around. But when you made the point about when you made a point about Europeans coming, no, it was Miss Diana. She said Europeans coming back to Africa. There's a white woman who is an activist. I cannot remember her name, but I will find it. And I think she's still alive. She's the one who did the school where she separated the blonde hair. Was it brown-eyed, blue-eyed? Yeah, she did.
You're talking about Dr. I see her face now. Yeah. Can't call her name.
Jane. Her first name is Jane.
Yeah,
Yeah,
What?
right.
Yeah,
Jane.
I can't remember her name, but she said almost the same thing that you said, and she said, "Well, we're all Africans," and she said, "So you're my cousin, you're my, we just left, and so it made me think of that because I mean, at the end of the day, as far as the continent and where we come from, that's not even being debated, not by scientists, not by geneticists, nobody's debating that. Um, yeah, so that's why no, that's also Jane Elliott. Yes,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Is she still alive?
I miss you.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Is she still alive? Okay.
Yeah, she's making some controversial statements now that is making the
Making waves.
yes.
The what?
She's now making some controversial comments now that is making some waves, as my husband stated. That's something that she's saying that is just like upsetting people.
Well, I have my students listen to some of her speeches and because she speaks with Dr. Angela
It's something.
Davis.
Yeah.
Yeah, she has some speaking engagements with her.
Oh, I know what it is. I know what it was now. They're saying that she's hypocritical because of an incident that took place where somebody was filming and she didn't know that it was being recorded. And yeah, so, and she didn't stop it. And they were saying that she's hypocritical where she seemed like she's on camera supporting Black people and saying how people are marginalized and mistreated. But yet behind the camera, when somebody is doing what she's claiming they're doing, she don't stop it. She didn't say anything about it. It took a young child, a young man to come up and say, hey, that's wrong for you to use that type of terminology about these group of people. So they're saying, why didn't she step up? And she's the one that's on camera, making comments and supporting us and how we're being mistreated. Why is she not doing that behind the camera, off camera? So they're saying she's being hypocritical.
Okay.
And it was recorded. She didn't know it was being recorded.
Were they using the N-word?
Yes. And they're saying that because it's another guy, not only her, but it's a guy from Louisiana. I can't remember his name. He's doing the same thing. And so the narrative.
Someone said she said the N-word.
You said the N-word.
Oh, was it her? I thought it was somebody else and she didn't stop it. Okay.
That's a whole nother level right there,
Yeah, so that's why it's buzz out there. But that guy also that's going around talking about our situation, our what we have endured and what we are enduring now. And so the Black community are saying that they're using us and our
issues,
experiences to monopolize off of it. Why are you talking? And they're not doing anything to change the situation. So the Black community is saying they're just using us, as many of them have, just to monopolize off of our situation.
I could see that. I mean, I'm not even saying with them because I never saw that, so I can't speak to that. But I could definitely see that. I mean, people use they appropriate many things from our community.
Oh, definitely.
To have a platform, so. That wouldn't be anything new. But it would be disappointing, especially, Jane Elliott, how she built a name for herself for decades now.
It's recorded. It's recorded. A young guy was recording it. So, but anyway, we can find that and send that to you as well. So this.
Okay. Yeah, I got some stuff to look at now. So that'll be good.
So, okay. We thank you so much, Dr. Wren. We don't want to take up more of your time because you got to go to that party.
Yeah. I already brushed my teeth, so I'm halfway there. Halfway there.
Oh, thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Yes, we really appreciate it. And just to let you know, you're welcome to join us at any time. Okay. We thank you so much.
Well, we touched on a lot of controversial stuff. So.
Yes.
Yes. It feels like my human rights class. I'm always like, we're talking governments, people. Good stuff. All right.
Well, conversations are good because it's things that you may agree with, things that you may not agree with, and it's just coming from a whole lot of different perspectives, so these conversations are good. So, again, we truly thank you. You be increased. All right. Thank you so much.
Y'all have a good one.
You too.
You too. Thank you.
And family, want to say thank you for being with us. And thank you again to our guest, Dr. Kimberly Wren. And we will be speaking with you all soon, and you all be increased. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and end the recording, family.
I say.
Take care. Bye, say.